A few slides I'm going to share with you just to get started with some information and updates. So, are you seeing the PowerPoint? Thank you. Thank you, Max. All right, we'll go ahead and get started then. This is our agenda for the day. I'll just be doing kind of some updates and information for this year. And then our brilliant and wonderful colleague, Erin Bruff, who is the coordinator of the data and statistics team at USBE, is going to share with you a longitudinal data equity study that he did. And we'll be looking at that and discussing and what are the implications of that study for practice going forward. Following Erin's presentation, we'll take a quick comfort break. And then we will turn the time over to Val Murdoch, who is going to share information and also provide you with an opportunity to meet in some breakout groups to discuss some ways that we might get paraprofessionals highly qualified for Title I schools. And then we'll close with the school improvement team, Tracy Vandeventer and Max Lang, Leslie Evans. They'll provide you with some information and updates about school improvement. Then this afternoon, from 1 to 3, Val will be holding office hours for the desktop monitoring instrument. She recorded a webinar recently and made that available to you. So she'll be available. She sent you a Zoom link so that you can ask her questions and get information that you need to complete the desktop monitoring instrument for this year. We always start with this at all of our Title I meetings, and that is, what is Title I? Why is it important? And what are our responsibilities in utilizing these funds to engage in continuous improvement? So the funding that goes to your LEAs for Title I Part A is referred to as improving basic programs operated by local education agencies. And the statutory purpose of Title I is to provide all children with significant opportunities to receive a fair, equitable, and high quality education and to close educational achievement gaps. So Title I plans, budgets, and expenditures at both the LEA level and the school level must support that statutory purpose. And we always talk about Title I is not just a funding stream. It's really funding to support continuous program improvement. So when Utah Grants opens up for this year and you start to work on your plans and you're working with school principals as they are developing their Title I plans and budgets, here are some questions that are good things to keep in mind. So how does this program initiative expenditure drive improved results for students? Will this program initiative or expenditure increase the capacity to improve results for Title I schools in your LEA? Will it accelerate school improvement efforts? If you're funding an initiative or a salary for a person, how will you maintain that if funding for some reason is not there in the future? So how will you build sustainability into what you're doing from the beginning? And then will it provide feedback loops that, again, support that nature of continuous program improvement? So all expenditures of Title I funds at both the district and the school level need to be supplemental in nature and directly related to increasing the achievement of economically and academically disadvantaged students in Title I schools. And just because something might be allowable under the Title I regulations doesn't mean it's always a reasonable or necessary expenditure. So you really need to think as you're budgeting to support your plan, whether that expense is really necessary to implement the Title I program. So this is something that I have used throughout my career since I've been a young teacher, and that is, how are the decisions that I am making going to benefit my students? So what do we want for those students' future, and how will they benefit from the conditions that I create and the actions I take as an educator? So some important information and updates. As you know, we recently submitted a waiver to the U.S. Department of Education due to the continuing disruptions created by the pandemic. The Department of Education provided an opportunity for state education agencies to apply for a waiver to extend all of the state fiscal year 2020 ESEA program funds for an additional year. These funds would have expired tomorrow, but because of this waiver, we have an additional year to make sure you have time to spend those funds if you have funds remaining. So it applies to all of the ESEA programs. So Title I, Part A, Title I school improvement grants that went out to CSI schools, evidence-based parent-family engagement. Some of you received funding for the home visit project or academic parent-teacher teams, migrant education, Title I-D, neglected and delinquent, Title II, Title III, which are English language acquisition services, and then Title IV-A, Title IV-B, and Title V-B is rural low-income schools. Utah gets a very, very small amount of money for that program. And the Department of Education determines which rural LEAs qualify for that. And then Title VII-B of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act. So you will notice that that ending date has been changed in the Utah grant system for all of these FY20 programs. However, the department did not extend a waiver for any of the fiscal year 20 COVID relief funds. So ESSER 1 from the CARES Act, Gear 1, the CRF, none of those COVID relief funds were extended through that waiver. The second part of the waiver that we received provides the option for LEAs that have not expended all of their Title I funds by tomorrow. Those funds become carryover on Friday, October 1st. October 1st is the first day of the federal fiscal year. So as you're probably aware, under the Title I regulations, typically an LEA can only request a 15% carryover provision waiver from our office once every 3 years. But because the feds extended this waiver to the states, you have the option of, even if you have had a waiver in the past 3 years and you need a waiver again for your fiscal year 21 Title I Part A funds, you can request that. So there's a form, I've got it linked here. It's also on our website. You can send that form to me by November 1st. And then we will work with Tammy Long and Marilee Wendell, our fiscal compliance managers, and make sure that we have documentation that you have requested a waiver. If you're a smaller LEA and you receive $50,000 or less in Title I funds for fiscal year 21, you do not need to request a waiver to carry over more than 15%. I think you're also aware that this past April, the United States Department of Agriculture extended the free meals waiver throughout the rest of the 2021-2022 school year. So I know some of you have been worried about how this will impact your poverty counts for Title I and some other programs. The way that Title I works in Utah grants, Aaron Bruff's team sends a secure file to the Utah grants team that has the October 1 student poverty counts that LEAs submit to USBE each year. So so Friday, those student counts are due. So that information is preloaded into the Utah grant system for Title I. But you do have the option when you go in to fill out your application in Utah grants, you can edit that form and put in poverty data you feel is more accurate for your particular buildings. I've also linked here the child nutrition program staff at USBE every year conducts a survey of how many students are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And that's the October 31st survey report. And that's on our website, and I have linked it there. But this is a different report than what Aaron's group provides to the Utah grants team to preload into Utah grants. Okay, so there's the October 1 count, that's what's preloaded, but there's also this free and reduced lunch survey that's gathered every year on October 31st. Okay, so you can look at that. It's linked here, the 2020 report, if that's something that you would like to look at. The Utah grants, we had to have the vendor for Utah grants make some updates to some of the forms in the Title I application. So our team has been working with the Utah grants team, and in turn, they've been reaching out to the vendors with the scope of work for the changes that needed to be made. So unfortunately, the vendor is still working on those changes, and they have not yet been able to open the Title I application. I did reach out to the Utah grants staff yesterday, and they said the vendor was indicating that the changes and updates should be ready in 2 weeks. So our team decided that the tentative due date this year for Title I will be Friday, November 12th. And we will send out explicit directions after we're able to view the changes that the vendor makes to the form. So you will get a set of directions that looks like this. And I crossed this out because it said it was due November 1st, which we know this year we won't be able to meet that deadline. So be looking for those directions in the next few weeks. Another thing I'd like to make you aware of is that across the past year, we've worked on the Title I Part A Handbook, our program and fiscal handbook. We made revisions and updates. We put in a new guidance that the Department of Education had released. And USBE has a technical writer and editor on staff now. So she recently went through and updated everything and fixed all the formatting. So this new handbook is linked here. Some of you may have the old version. It has a picture of some kids on the front, but this is the new one. And so I would encourage you to bookmark this, or, if you want to, print out a copy and refer to it. We tried to put in there as much information as we could, with links to all of the federal guidance documents and regulations and the sections of the Every Student Succeeds Act that kind of regulate what we do in Title I. So it really is new and improved. We're excited to roll that out to you. Some of you have been involved in our teacher clarity and assessment capable learners cohorts. Jennifer Thronson in Teaching and Learning started the first cohort 2 or 3 years ago, and then Title I picked it up, and so cohort 2 just finished. They had their final day last week. We were delayed a little bit due to the disruptions with COVID. And cohort 3 started, they had their first session also last week. So we were able to secure a 5-year contract with Corwin and the 2 wonderful presenters, Dr. Nancy Fry and Dr. Tony Faddis, to support 4 additional cohorts. So as I said, cohort 3, we just kicked that cohort off last week, and they'll be meeting again in October for the second session. But we have already set the dates for cohort 4, which will be during the 2022-2023 school year. And then we will have cohorts up to cohort 7 on this contract that we have that will take us through 2025-2026. The schools and districts that have participated in this have been excited about the implementation that they are doing. I heard from wonderful Lisa Flinders, who is the principal of South Summit Elementary in South Summit District last week. Her school participated in cohort 2. And she said it had really changed what they were doing in their school. It had changed teacher practice, but it also changed her practice as an administrator and a leader. And so she was very excited about it. I also heard from principal in Provo School District, Jason Benson at Franklin Elementary, that was, said how grateful they were for the opportunity and what a difference it had made. So we have people in the chat box that were putting comments in saying, this is the best professional learning I have had in my entire career. So we feel strongly that this is a really great opportunity to really learn how to make our instruction more clear, to make it more explicit. And it's really not about teaching kids how to take a test, right? Because when you look at the title, Assessment Capable Visible Learners, you're thinking, oh, am I teaching kids how to take tests? No, it's not about tests. It's about making sure that kids are well aware of where they are in their current learning trajectory. They know where they are, they know where they're going, and they know exactly what they need to do to get to the next level. So it's very impactful. It's all based on the work of Dr. John Hattie and all the work he has done in studying meta-analyses of particular strategies and practices that make a difference. Here are some resources I wanted to bring to your attention. They recently published a gold paper titled Rebounding and Reinvesting, and it's where the evidence points for accelerating learning. So again, Nancy Fry and Doug Fisher, John Hattie, and John Almerode have, put this together. There's a link here to the document. And then the Visible Learning Database is continually being updated. So this is the link to the updated database, and you can search on that database across 9 different domains of practices that have influence on student learning. So you can look at student characteristics, classrooms, student learning strategies, what effect the home has on student learning, teacher effects, teaching strategies, school-wide effects, effects from different types of curricula, and then technology, school, and out-of-school strategies. So this will give you the effect sizes so that as you're doing your planning and you're doing your budgeting, you can focus on those things that have a good chance of making an actual difference for kids and accelerating your learning. And then another site that was mentioned in our training last week, and Dr. Christelle Estrada is very familiar and had worked with this, the School Reform Initiative, which used to be the Annenberg Institute. But they have a lot of resources and protocols that you can download at this website. So I wanted to make those available to you. It's that time of year when we're usually choosing our 2 national ESEA distinguished schools. And as you're well aware, this year we have delays in accessing the data. There are some studies being done with the data. So we will provide some additional information in the coming weeks. But we always send 2 schools. We can only send 2 schools, but those schools will be honored at the National ESEA Conference, which will be held in February 2022. There are 3 categories of schools. We can only send 2 schools, and they can't be from the same category. So one category are schools that are really achieving well overall, based on all of the indicators that Utah has in our accountability system. The second category are schools that are closing the achievement gap between student groups. And then the third category is schools that are performing well with specific student groups. So that might be students who are multilingual learners, students who are homeless. So we'll be looking at that a little bit more. But as you know, there have been, some issues with the data in the past few years with COVID and other things. And so we will do our best to identify some schools that we can provide that opportunity. Those 2 schools will receive a supplemental Title I award that will cover the cost of their registration for the conference and also their travel if they choose to attend the conference in person. The conference this year will be a hybrid conference, so it will be in person in New Orleans, but also available virtually. Here are some dates for this fiscal year to remember. So November 1st, if you need to carry over 15% or more of your fiscal year 21 Title I funds, you need to submit that waiver request. Our next Title I directors meeting will be November 10th, and it will be over Zoom. November 12th, we're hoping this date is going to work. It will be Title I applications due in Utah grants. December 1st, the desktop monitoring instrument is due, and then you have the dates for the National ESEA Conference and then the Spring Title I Directors Meeting. And then dates have already been set, June 15th and 16th, 2022 for the Systems Conference, which will be held at the Provo Convention Center. And that's always a great conference. They bring in wonderful keynote speakers and have a lot of excellent presentations from Utah educators, as well as some national presenters. This is the contact information for all of the ESEA programs. So you have the person that works with that program and what their role is, and then also their phone number. So I'm going to stop and we will go back and see if are there any questions. Oh, Christelle made a comment about ACL has made a difference at the secondary level as well. Yes. East High School in Salt Lake participated in cohort 1. They also have a group participating in cohort 3. And they have really embraced that and are doing some really fabulous things at the high school level. But we've also had Horizonte School in Salt Lake City, which is an alternative high school and adult ed program. They participated in cohort 2. And we also had Glendale Middle School from Salt Lake. The cohort 3 this year is primarily elementary schools, with the exception of the the high school group from East High School. So we wanted to make you aware of those dates. We also already have 3 or 4 schools on a waiting list for cohort 4. So we're excited about that. Any questions about anything that was shared to this point? If not, I'm going to turn the time over to Aaron Braff. And we'll let Aaron take you through this wonderful data study that he has done.
Thank you. The host has disabled the participating screen sharing. So Becky, do you want to take the slides and share it through, or you want to give that to me and I'll take the slide?
I thought I made you a co-host.
I thought you did too, but as I clicked the button, it said no.
Oh, that's weird.
I apologize.
Becky Peters, do you know how to fix that?
Yeah, you'll need to bring them up on the screen, and looks like I don't have the authority to do that, but if you click on his name, and then there's a more option. And
I do. Okay, Aaron, you're a co-host now.
Yay. Oh, there we go.
I thought I'd already set that up.
I thought you did too. Okay. And let's start the presentation and make sure it is displaying correctly. Are you seeing one slide, or are you seeing the preview slide? I believe you're seeing
one slide that says statewide student.
All right. Okay, thank you. And if someone can monitor the chat for me, that would be appreciated. Also, I would like this to be more of discussion, either just in the chats, instead of just listening to me for an hour and a half, which is incredibly boring. I would like some feedback, some input, some questions if they arise. And so as we go through this presentation, just understand that I'm not looking to speak at you for an hour and a half. That's a long time. But with that said, let's start. What was tasked of the USBE staff a number of months ago by the state board was, is there evidence to suggest that there are barriers to high quality learning opportunities and improvement outcomes among different demographic groups of students that we track? That was the question. Can we actually see empirical evidence? It was a great question. One that got away from the gut feelings, the assumptions and such, and says, well, are there actually evidence inside of there? So to start off, we have 3 key questions that are critically important to follow. Now, what we did was a state level analysis. Hopefully, the lessons learned from this PowerPoint, and I believe this PowerPoint will be shared if it hasn't already been shared with you, is that you are able to go through and follow the same process within your own LEAs. So the first question, and I'd like you to, as I read through these questions, either write down on the side, on a notebook or somewhere, actually answer the question is, what are the policies? What are your policies, your programs and practices so obviously our questions were in Utah, but in your LEA that are aimed to reduce barriers to high quality learning opportunities and improve outcome. Can you name those policies, programs, practices, what have you? And obviously, we're here with the Title I directors. When I say Title I, I'm going to say federal grant. I don't know what you're, anyway, I call you Title I directors. If I'm wrong, Becky will correct me. Anyway, can you list those? Hopefully the answer is absolutely, and you pull out your list and say, here's where they are. The second part, is there any evidence to suggest that these policies, programs, and practices are effective? It's critically important that what you do can come back and show evidence that they are successful or they are doing they are moving the needle one way or another. And then third, how can we increase quality education opportunities for all students? So again, as we talk about a gap analysis, and hopefully this is each one of you, and obviously you can take this back to your LEAs and have these discussions with your staff, with your boards, with your leadership, with your principals, everyone that you work with, to say, what are our policies? What evidences do we have on these policies that they're effective? And how do we take these effectiveness and leverage it for all students? So as we looked at this at the state, we said, okay, what program data evaluation do we have available for us to do this study? We kind of separated it into two elements. We said we have the outcome, academic outcomes. We have the Acadians reading scores. We have the state content test scores. We have graduation rates we can look at. We're also doing an intergenerational poverty collaboration with multiple partners. We can look at those data points. We can also look at the students' experience data that we have, such as what their experience in special ed, incident and discipline data. We can look at the information that comes from the SHARP data, the IGP program participation, and we can also look at the pilots that are doing social emotional learning, because we actually do have data behind that. And so that was the task at hand. Do a gap analysis and say, are there evidences of equality or barriers? So let's first go through the academic outcomes. The first one was the Acadians reading. So I'm hearing dings and alerts going on. Is that anything, Rebecca, that I need to pay attention to? Okay, I don't know.
There's just people joining the meeting.
Okay, thank you. So what we did is we looked at the percent of students at or above benchmark at the end of year by the demographic groups. Again, this is grade 1 through 3 from 2016 to 2019. So again, where's everyone at? We have the state average, which is the top, the yellow line. We have the economic disadvantage group, which is the blue, the English learners, this orange color, and then students with disability, that's that kind of gray color. So first off, you look at it and say, are there gaps? Well, the inherent answer is, well, yes, there's a definite gap and trend inside of there. The second part of the question, are those gaps decreasing or increasing, or are they stagnant? As we looked at this data, you can see there's a slight fluctuation on the ELs, but for the most part, the state level, starting at 72, then 71, 71, 71, that's pretty static. Again, we're talking fairly large numbers. And when you compare to state numbers, that's a pretty stable number. You're not going to see big fluctuations or changes as you would as you start reducing the number of events or tests, for example, in this case. So if you go down to an LEA or down to a school or even to a classroom, obviously, you're going to start seeing fluctuations. But then as we look at the economic disadvantage, again, at the state level, English learners and students with disability, you see that those numbers are A, stable because we're looking at the state, and two, are they decreasing? The gap in any way, can we detect any changes on it? The answer is no, there's definitely a gap. Is that gap decreasing? Nope, it seems to be maintaining itself over those 4 years. Then we looked at the race ethnicity and put that in this plot. Again, it's a little hard to see, and we're going to go into other visualizations in this presentation, but as you can see inside of here, the state number is that red line, which kind of hovers. Again, it was similar to the last page that we saw in there, around the 71, 72 range all the way across. You can see that we have a few groups, the Asian American population, the white population, and the 2 or more races pretty much group or stay around that higher level. The Pacific Islanders are below that. And then you see the gray line, which is the Black African American. The Hispanic group then is the yellow, and then the dark blue, which is the American Indian group, is showing an increase in its gap. Again, that we're talking about 1st through 3rd graders here. For the most part, we see some stability, no increase or decrease, except for the Native Americans. We are seeing an increase happening inside of there. So this was something that drew our attention, and we took note saying, okay, we are seeing a change here. Other outcomes. So we looked at the state content test. So this is the RISE, the CRT data for those. And when I say CRT, don't get that confused with the critical race theory of today's vernacular. That's the criterion reference tests of 15 plus, well, yeah, number of years ago. That test that we're looking at, and then the Utah Aspire Plus data. So let's talk about effect size, what it is, and how we read this. Becky Donaldson in her last presentation talked about effect size, looking at the impacts. So effect size is a statistical concept that measures the strength of a relationship between 2 variables on a numeric scale. For example, if we have data on the height of men and women, and we notice that on average, men are taller than women, the importance of the difference between the height of men and the height of women is measured with the effect size. We use then Cohen's effect size, which is the difference of the 2 population means, and is divided by the standard deviation from the data. This allows us to describe the difference between the 2 groups as, is this small, is it a medium size, or is this large? It's also used to determine if the difference between 2 proportions is meaningful. So again, if we did a height for men and women, boys and girls in 5th grade, in 8th grade, however you want to approach that, you would see that the averages will be different. So for example, if we did the height of 5th grades on 5th grade students and measured women, when we say women, the females and the males, we would see that there is a difference on average. Who's taller? Well, the females are taller at that age. Is it significant? It could be. I haven't actually run that data to know, but what we're looking at is it a small difference? Is it a large difference? Is it a medium difference? And as we start going through there, it helps guide us in our decisions. So instead of just looking at random variables and numbers and saying, yep, it's just all random, we're actually able to go in and identify a pattern, and 2, is that pattern significant? And if it's significant, meaning it's more than just random, then what is the impact of that pattern that we're seeing inside of there? Hopefully that makes sense to all of you. So again, looking at the rule of thumb inside of it, the greater the effect size, either positive or negative, the greater the performance difference between the student groups. So again, this allows us to go beyond the testing for statistical significance. And again, going back to what is statistical significance? Well, that means the data are following a pattern and less random. If hopefully you remember from your stats class long ago, the difference between if you're just rolling a dice or flipping a quarter, that's random. You're not going to follow. There should be randomness in the system. What we then test for is within the effect or within the working of a program, whatever, are there certain patterns that are coming out? And if so, then we say, well, there's statistical significance to the data that we've gone through and tested. So that's kind of the first approach. The second approach then is saying, is that pattern that we are seeing in there significant enough? What kind of effect can we see inside of there? And so that is presented to us in a number. Usually it's between a 0 and a 1, but it can go up higher than that. It can go up to about a 5, which is just astronomically large. But typically we'd say a small effect size is anywhere between 0 and 0.2. We're saying, yeah, we can see that there's a pattern inside of there, but the difference is really kind of small. Then we move up to a 5. So from a 2 to a 4 would be the small effect size. From a 5 and higher, then we're start saying, yeah, there is a kind of a medium difference, or there's a bigger impact inside of here that we need to start really paying attention. So 1, we've already proved that this is more than random. 2, it is having an impact. And once we hit from the 0.5 to the 0.7 range, we're saying, yeah, that's kind of pay attention, that this is significant and it's fairly, it's a medium range of importance. And then we go from 0.8 and above, and then we start saying there is a large difference here between this population. So if memory serves me right, if I said, again, going back to the height analogy, if I was looking at 5th graders and I saw that the boys were 1.3 or negative 1.3 on an effect size difference from what the girls were at, that would tell me that, yeah, there is something going on in there that has a huge significance. Well, obviously that significance can typically be pointed to is what's causing it is, well, it's the age of maturity. When do girls hit their growth spurts and when do boys hit their growth spurts? Well, girls typically hit it before the boys do, and the boys then catch up a little bit later. You've all seen this. And so again, just because we identify a significance doesn't mean, it's pointing, we have to be careful what it's pointing to too. But anyway, just sharing that information. So the data I'm going to show you, sorry, long explanation behind all of this stuff. But what we looked at is we looked at the CRTs. Again, not the current vernacular of the critical race theory. We're talking about criterion reference tests. This was done from 2003 to 2013. And this did assess grades 1 through 12. Then in 2014 through 2018, we have the RISE data, which was, sorry, not the RISE data, the SAGE data. And that was 3rd grade through 10th grade. And then 2019, we had the RISE data, which is a 3 through 8, and the Utah Aspire Plus, which is a 9 through 10 tests. Now, the reality is these are different tests. They have different standards, and you cannot compare the scaled score for one to another and say these are the same thing. But what you can do is say, instead of comparing from year to year to each other, what we wanted to look at is, let's compare effect size. So what is my student group compared to the state average of all students? How much is that gap different? And is that improving or changing from year to year to year? That is a comparable number. Again, we're not comparing the percent proficiency or the percent increase or anything like that. What we're looking at is, what is that gap from year to year to year? Are we seeing a difference? Does that make sense? Becky, can you, let me just ask everyone, is anyone confused before I jump into the next slide? Maybe I should ask for a raise of hands saying, is everyone, are you ready to move on? Again, I cannot.
You're good, Aaron. That makes sense.
Thank you. Again, I'm trying to gauge if people are sleeping on me or not. I can't see I can't see you. Anyway, So let's move forward. Now you're like, oh, I got to pull up my glasses and zoom into this. There's a lot of data here. Again, this is 12 years gap analysis that we did for the state. And I'm going to show you this data, and then we're going to collapse it into a single, little bit more easily readable view. But this is then, you know, the pinpoints, and you're supposed to be able to say in here, okay, what are these numbers? Again, we talked about effect size. So the number is between 0 and 5, positive or negative. So what we see inside of here is a rank order of the different groups. On the top is the race ethnicity. I don't know if you can see my mouse swirling inside of there or not, but this, oops, I didn't want to move forward, but it doesn't. Okay, I'm just saying this right here is language arts. This one is mathematics, and this one is science. I'll just let you look at the patterns inside of there. Blues is above the line. That reddish, brown, orange is below the line. And so as I jumping through 3 of these back and forth, look for the pattern. Oops, sorry. Look at the pattern or the movement. Are we seeing movement between these? And as you move your eyes across the row, are you seeing gaps increase or decrease? Again, you should have access to the slide so you can take the image itself and look at it and zoom in, say, hey, what are we looking at? Again, the top is the race ethnicity. Then we have the economic disadvantage. We have students with disability, and then we have English learners at the very bottom. Let's just say, as I take all these and I collapse it into a single aggregate. So this is 12 years, looking across 12 years. So now I'm not looking at trends of increasing or decreasing, just what am I seeing on my gaps? When I look at this, I say, okay, for English or ELA, it's English Language Arts, math and science. When I look at this of race ethnicity, what am I seeing over a 12-year study that we did? And the answer is Asians are 0.2. Going back to the Cohen's effect size that we talked about, is that small, medium, or large? I need someone to answer for me, not from USBE, if you don't mind, but just tell me, as you remember, what is that? Is it a small, medium, or large? And you're not shy people, I know this.
That's a small, bud.
Thank you, whoever said that. I think that was Missy Hamilton. Thank you, appreciate you being brave there. Okay.
Well, I just stole the answers from the rest of the people chatting.
Great.
They're smarter than me.
Awesome. Thank you for being brave and answering that. So it's a small effect size. We can see that. Okay, let's look at then the American Indian. Negative 1.4, negative 1.6, negative 1.6. Small, medium, large. What is that?
Extra large.
Extra large. Thank you. Is there empirical evidence? Well, there it is. Over a 12-year study. Here it is by not economic disadvantage, and then the low income, the students with disabilities, and the ELs. So let me ask the question out again. A 0.5, what is that? Small, medium, large. Someone gets that. Someone else.
Medium.
Thank you. They're getting this. That's awesome. Okay, so when we look at the low income of a -8, is that small, medium, or large?
Large.
Thank you. So anything above 8, then automatically you say, all right, let's look at the ELs. 2.7, 2.3. That bottom one is 2.7. What does that tell you? 12 years. Is that small, medium?
There's still hope.
We've got work to do. Yes. Is that alarming for anyone?
It is for me. This is Katina, and my students, I have over 80% of my students that speak Spanish first or Spanglish first. And so that's a big deal for us. And this is the first year we've actually been able to afford a full-time ESL teacher. So I am super over the moon about that. But yeah, I still think it's hopeful. I still think it's doable. I may be dumb, but I still think it's doable.
Not dumb. Thank you for that answer. By the way, so these are state numbers. Big, hard to wield or change or adjust to show fluctuations, to show good practices at sites. These numbers are incredibly difficult to show that movement. You actually have to take this, replicate the effort or the calculation and do it at your level, be it at a school, be it at your district, to say, am I seeing some movement? Are the programs that we have in place having an effect upon our student groups? State level, it is so hard to actually pinpoint and say, yep, see, this is exactly what we're doing. That's the work, for example, what Christelle is doing with the EL nominations and what Becky Donaldson presented and saying, here's the awards for these schools that are doing fantastic. Because though we are seeing this at a state number, there are lots of examples of fantastic work where that trend is being reversed or that gap is being shrunk. So know that, yes, it can be done. When you're talking about state numbers, and we're talking over 500,000 students, yes, this is definitely happening. So we can see a gap, but we can also see at smaller parts that it's moving. So a second part of the discussion that we came up with is, we said, okay, let's refine our group a little bit and let's, as best we can, let's remove the risk factors. We want to just look at the students who should be at a similar performance level. Let's take out the students who or experience poverty, or students with disability, or EL students. Well, let's take them all out. We only want to look at the race identification, or those student groups inside of there. Those who don't have those risks, those additional risk factors inside of there. So we said, let's repeat the study. And instead of doing the 12-year, we shrunk it to just 6 years, looking at the SAGE and the RISE data. So let's just kind of jump into that. So these, again, are all students throughout the state who do not have, who are not classified as low income, who are not classified as EL, and are not classified as special ed students. And it shows, again, the effect size gap inside of here. So as we go through this, here's language arts, here's mathematics, here's science. And now let's compare this to, let's aggregate this all together. What are we seeing? The Asians, again, now they're at a 0.9, a 0.1, and then fascinating on science is they're 0. What does that tell you?
Kids of color do not do well in our state. And we have a lot of work to do.
Is it big, small, medium? What sizes are you seeing here?
Large. There's multiple races is around the small, close to medium, but every other race is above large and above extra.
You've got it. These are empirical evidences that we can actually point at and say, as a state, should we be concerned? These are large effect size. Yeah, it's concerning. Do we have our work cut out for us? Absolutely. Let's look at a couple other things. Let me check my time, see how fast and how much time I have left. So graduation rates. Again, we wanted to look at this. We didn't drop this into effect size, but we want to see trends. Are we seeing a difference? A closing of the gap? because we know that the graduation rates have increased. So all students in 2013, it was 81.4%. And then in 2020, it was 88.2%. So yay, it went up. And as we looked at the all the races in the combination, we can see there are still gaps, but they all went up. That's good. That was expected. Everyone went up. Do we see a closing of the gap inside of there? The answer is yes, we have seen some. The African American, you can see that gap inside of there does exist, and it's fairly large, but we're happy to see that movement is there. Where, for example, you look at the multiple race, it's a little bit closer clustered to each other. So there's a number of things that you do as you look at this graph. Is one, you'd say, what is the distance between the 2013 and the 2020 between the student groups? Okay, what is then the distance of the given year against the state number? How big of a gap is that? And then you would compare that against to what was the gap of the prior 2013 between the two to help do that comparison. Looking at
Erin,
go
can
ahead.
I interrupt you for a second? The previous slide with the graduation rate, is there any major changes in requirements from 213 to 220 as far as what a graduation looks like? What requirements need to be in play for that to happen? Have we changed that?
That's a fantastic question. The reason why those dates were used actually has to do with the stability of the federal cohort graduation requirements. So when we look at, for example, portrait of the graduate and graduation requirements, those haven't radically changed one way or the other. What did change was the calculation of how we do a cohort tracking, which means the moment a student is given an enrollment record in 9th grade, we track them at the state through that 4-year period, saying, where did they go? Did they end up graduating? Did they end up dropping out? Did they end up transferring to a private school or homeschool? Whatever. We have to track every single student in there and know exactly where they go. That's what this does. And we had some really stable data come in 2013. That actually started in 2008. Where that transition happened, we saw a huge increase because it was the cleansing of the data was the primary driver of that graduation rate increase, where moving from 2013 to 2020 really starts saying, okay, we are getting to those students. Does that answer your question? I think that was Katrina that said that.
Katina, yes,
right.
it does. Yeah.
Okay. So no major changes. So again, fairly stable longitudinal review that we can look at. Thank
Erin,
you.
we have a couple of questions. JM from Ogden is asked, is there a plan for USBE to show LEA assessment directors how to calculate this data at the LEA level?
Great question. Yes. We were working with yes, we're absolutely doing this. It's a lot of data, but yes, we are putting in place some tools that they can utilize. It will probably take us about a year to get them trained up, and hopefully they will share the knowledge with you guys. If they don't, go knock on the doors and make them share it with you. But yes, we are in the process of getting some tools so they can actually do these calculations in place. Great question. Next question.
One other question. This one's from Lisa at American Preparatory Academy. Have you seen English learners having more or less difficulty on different testing instruments?
Great question. Now you're bringing in correlation studies that are not done. The answer is there difficulty for English learners in regular assessments? The answer is, well, that depends on their English abilities. Obviously, so when you start looking at that, it's hard to take a test if you're learning the language at the same time. That's a given. But the answer is once they start reaching the higher levels of proficiency as gauged by WIDA, why should they perform any differently on a test? Now you're asking about psychometrics and the development of a test, which are really complicated, but let me just state this on state level assessments. The best test that can be produced, and this is the hypothesis or the theory behind item response theory and just test development, is the best tests are repeatable and reliable. And it doesn't matter if I come into the system with lots of advantages, such as knowing English, what have you, or I'm having a good day or a bad day. It should measure you equally from one day to another day, or put you within that range of comparability. And the assessment team does, and I'm just stating, the assessment team does an incredible amount of work to make sure that those assessments actually function through that process. There are reviews, there's bias reviews, there's all kinds of things inside of it. Does that mean they're perfect? No. Does that mean that a student who is EL has a hard time with the test? They could. Does it show in the results of the test? It probably does. Or do we see a huge effect size on it? No. When you bring it into the bias and sensitivity review, it's not a big effect size, if that makes sense. It's there, but it's not massive enough that you're saying, oh, we've got to throw out that test and start over again. That's what that bias sensitivity, that's why they go through all that process to see that test works correctly. The issue that we see is the students who are EL might not be getting the I'm being careful here, but the teachers might inadvertently not give them or push them as much as they really should be. The kids are capable of learning, obviously, but there might be some systemic problems that are affecting the kids' performance on the test. That's a complicated question, slightly complicated answer. It maybe wasn't very good. Does that help? I don't know who asked it.
Did that help, Lisa?
She said yes in the comments.
Okay, thank you. Again, I can't see the comments. Any other questions? Again, looking at my time. Okay, let's moving on. Academic outcomes, intergenerational poverty. So this group right here is we looked at a number of areas. Basically, the education, the early childhood development, the family economic stability, and health. We do produce an annual IGP report. Again, this is in collaboration with the Department of Workforce Services. This is with the Department of Health, early childhood, preschool programs and such. And it's also with higher ed. So we look at the intergenerational poverty group, and we want to say, was there information there that empirically pointed that there was a gap? So the following slides, again, show that from kindergarten through graduation, students experiencing intergenerational poverty have substantially worse outcomes compared with state overall population. It's something that we're aware of, and yes. So as we pointed, as we're like, yep, we've got an issue here that should be on people's radar. So one, we look at the keep entry. For those who are IGP, their performances are far below what the all students performances on both the entry and the exit. And then we look at the numeracy component behind it. There's a substantial gap inside of there too. Again, this is a very small subset of the economic disadvantaged students. These are students who their parents are suffering poverty and possibly the generation before then. We looked at their standardized test performance for third grade language arts and eighth grade language arts as kind of key indicator points of time to take a look at it. And we say, how's the IGP group performing? 23% in third grade language arts versus the state at 46. And then looking again at the eighth grade math, 17 versus 42. We didn't do an effect size calculation on that because we knew it was just huge. So just sharing with you as we looked at that, we're like, yeah, concerns as we looked at those. Then we looked at the ACT benchmark percentages on these students. Again, the IGP versus all students, you can see the gap. We looked at the graduation rate, and there's a bit of a gap. So one, we're seeing that 78% of them did graduate, 11% of them dropped out, and then we see the other completers. There's a big group of them that are put in as retained seniors, percentage-wise, of those who are other completers against the rest of the population. They continue on in the schools. There are probably other indicators that go along with these students, but one of the, again, the points that we are following on these students throughout time is the fact that they come from these families of just extreme poverty and a history of poverty within the home. So as we looked at this, we said, well, what kind of interventions and participation can we see of the IGP students? This affects you guys. And where do we see these students? So the program participation of IGP students, again, the hope was that they were 100% in a lot of these things. Well, the answer is 61% of them were in the early literacy programs. 46% of these students were in the OEK, or the optional enhanced kindergarten, and 40% of them are identified in the Title I school-wide. And then you can see those numbers after that kind of drop down. Again, we know that these are programs aimed to help low-income students. Small percentage of the students are getting in all these. Good things, early literacy, OEK, Title I, they're in those schools. A large percentage of them, but not 100%. So these are just other indicators of concerns that we looked at. So now we start jumping into students' experience. Okay, statewide, identification, and we're talking about the students with disabilities. So this is OSEP data for those who might be wearing like 3 or 4 hats. Or special ed, Title I, might be the assessment director. And I know there are some of you out there who have multiple hats. But there are other reporting indicators that we need to look at and say, are there concerns, especially with a risk ratio calculations that we have to look at? And this is federal requirements. Basically, as we look at it statewide overall, there's not a problem with disproportionality in student of particular race, ethnicity being identified as students with disabilities, which means the risk ratio is less than 2. The number do raise concerns that there may be disproportionate in students of particular race being identified in a particular disability type. And we talked about those ratios, so I'll show you those numbers. Again, this kind of goes into the detail of the OSEP race ethnicity risk ratio. I don't know if you guys want to jump into this or not. Basically, we're saying if it's greater than 3, we flag them. So with that said, we looked at the identification. This is for 2020. You can see the Asian and then the American Indians had the highest. And then the whites are 0.8. Again, jumping back to this slide, it's a risk ratio of greater than 3 is flagged as a disproportionality. Again, this is based on federal standards. So you can see inside of there, no, we're not seeing a risk flag pop up when we looked at that data. What we did see, the African Americans, in the different identifications inside of special ed, we saw that the emotional disturbance area. So if a kid was had their can't think of the acronym. Their individualized IG. No, I can't.
IEP.
Thank you. There it is. Like that's the IEP, and they identify emotional disturbance. You can see on the African American, that one does jump up. But again, if we jump back over that, this is overall identification. As we do look at that, it's like there's a risk that we're watching carefully at the state level. The data again suggests disproportionality in students who identify as Black African Americans being identified as emotional disturbance. This is again review of the LEA identification process shows no disproportionality though. This looks at another component of the IGP in special education. So the IGP is that this first mark inside of here, then the second, when I say this first, I apologize. The blue bar shows you the special ed IGP students. The gray is the all students in special ed. And then the IGP percent of the total enrollment. You can see inside of here. So they are overly representative being identified based upon the population size of being in special ed over those years. So again, this goes back to the IGP issue is not only are these students in extreme poverty and in a history of poverty, but they also have an over percentage of them being identified as special ed compared to the overall population. So again, the overall population being identified special ed in the years 13, 14, 14, and 14, where if I was then doubly classified as special ed and IGP, it's 24, 25, 26, and 26. That is a quarter of those students. Anyway, again, as we're looking at this, it's like, yeah, there's some concerns inside of there. Okay, any questions? I think I'm boring you guys to death. I can't see you sleeping on the monitor. Of course, most of you turn off your cameras when that starts happening. So anyway, the student experience. Rebecca, how am I doing? Speed up, slow down? I mean, there's lots of slides and we're halfway through and I can speed up.
Yeah, I think you're fine. You still got 45 minutes.
Okay. Maybe we'll get out early. I don't know. There, all right, so let's talk about experience data inside of here. Student incident level reporting. Again, every year you're required to submit incident data. We looked at a number of things inside of there. We're looking at these rates. And so again, looking at disproportionalities or effects on if a student's in a race or low income, we want to say, okay, are they overly being identified percentage-wise in incident data? So we can first off look at one, the reports are improving. So you can see 14, 15, 16, and 17% of LAs reporting incidents. And then it jumps because we did some cleaning up of the data in 2018, 19, 20. When we say cleaning up the data, it was some education, promotions, making sure that the information is being submitted.
So Aaron, can I jump in here?
Absolutely. Thank you.
So this is Brett from Ames. This is a little bit of a sticking point because the slide that you just put on before was safe school violations. What sometimes they're asking for is all our behavioral data. So there's a real disconnect between those 4 items that you just put on there and then wanting all our behavioral data out of our SIS system. And then the issue is if we don't have any, I don't know whether anyone else has experienced this. I know some of the other early college has. If we don't have any special ed students on a safe school report, we've gotten dinged on our UPIPs for not having that. So I am very, very cautious about what I report, and I will not send my whole behavioral data to them. So what is communicated is exactly what you just said, is those 4 safe school items. But then when they ask for the data, they want all our behavioral data, which is not what that's why there's some inconsistencies. And then what happens on the other end, if you don't have any safe school violations, then you get an audit that saying, well, you're doing something wrong because you don't have them. And I know I'm not the only one that's had that issue. So thanks.
Thank you for the input. No, and I totally understand what you're saying. This is an area of data accuracy and utilization that is both sensitive. It has all kinds of ramifications as we start reporting it, and it's in a continuous process of refinement.
Yeah.
Of
And
what
And just for some context for those folks that don't know me, I was responsible for this data reporting for all of Jordan for many years. So it's not like I didn't understand what was going on and was just fighting to be fighting. But once I transitioned to a charter school, it seemed like the requirements were different. Anyway, so I did report this data for many, many, many years for a larger school district. And then got a very different reaction from the state as a charter school director. Thanks.
Yeah. And again, yes, totally understand. And really hopefully what I'm trying to share here is, one, we're showing you areas that are reporting. We're also trying to show, one, what's happening on these trends. So as we start looking at the data, this is background information that needs to be known before we start jumping into other things that you make false assumptions and such. So I appreciate, I think that was Brett, and your information is, we recognize that there's underreporting that has happened. When I say underreporting, we're talking about all the incidents that are coming in, that they are coming in, and we're looking at this information and utilizing it. And again, being cautious and careful that we're not jumping to false conclusions or such. So, or over jumping, overstating. But so with that said, as we start looking at the data, what are we seeing? And then by race, ethnicity, students of special ed, economic disadvantage, and such, are the percentages misaligned or overly emphasized in certain groups? And so as you look at these, the first one is regular students versus special ed students, not economic disadvantage versus the economic disadvantage, and native speakers versus the English learners. Again, this number is the percent of the incident records of regular education versus special education. That's the variable they put in there, saying what's percentage of the population is getting these incidents that are coming through on there. Percent of students with one or more incident by race, ethnicity. And again, this is just looking at it. And let's look at the note: percent students of each race who had one or more incidents divided by the number of enrolled students of the same race. That's the number that we're trying to look at. Again, Native Americans are higher. The Asians are the lowest percentage inside of there. Percent of students with one or more incident by the demographic groups: economically disadvantaged, special ed, English learners, all students, native speakers, regular education, and not economically disadvantaged. Okay, so discipline data. Students identified as English learners make up 9% of the student population, but make up 14% of all discipline. And then it breaks it out by these different categories: police referral, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, expulsion, and then the percent of the enrollment inside of there. Next slide, SHARP survey. Most of you are familiar with the SHARP survey, and I hope you are anyway. This is 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders who take it. It's administered by the Utah Department of Human Services. It's every other year. So we looked at the data inside of there and said, okay, what kind of response rates do we have inside of there? These are the numbers that we see in response on the state. So again, it's not a full census. It's a sampling. You can also see inside of there, they have the ability to describe their heterosexual, gay, lesbian, bisexual, not sure, other, missing, unknown. They can put those percentages inside of there. This information is just provided by the SHARP that we took a look at. So then we start looking at what are the students saying about their own experience. If you've been bullied in the past 12 months, why do you think you were bullied? So we broke it out and say, look at the whites and the other races. The first one is color of my skin. Also, like, no, that's a very low percentage. Other races, quite a bit higher. Some other reason, about the same. The way I look. This is primarily why individuals think that they're bullied. The way I looked, or for some other reason. Again, that's a pretty broad, open category. And then my sexual orientation side of there. Interestingly, reasons for being bullied by Black or African and the other races. Well, that one jumps out. All of the races, it's not the color of the skin, but the African-American population self-reporting out says, yeah, it's the color of my skin. That's a huge percentage. And then you can see the breakdown throughout. So this should help, one, just help you see through the lens or the perspective of the students of what they're seeing and what they're reporting back. Again, going back to the initial question that was asked of us, are we seeing empirical evidence of disproportionate learning or discrepancies in learning and experience within the state of Utah? Clearly, we can see that, but when we look at whites and other races, you're not seeing that number. It kind of gets hidden, but when you look at the African-American population, definitely they're seeing that. Internally, they're seeing that view. This is how safe do you feel in each of the following areas within your school? Parking lot. They feel they're unsafe. The bathrooms, this is the percentage of feeling unsafe, and on the buses. Again, taking and looking at the African-American group inside of there, the parking lots, the bathroom, and the buses, it's not the same as the majority of the students. When I say the majority of the students, the large majority of the students in Utah are identified as white. So you can see that their perception is different. How worried, if at all, are you about the possibility each of the following things happening at your school? Gun violence or an active shooter situation. suicide by student, drug use, students using alcohol or drugs, again, white and all of the races. Then you jump over the African American group and you look at this and say, are they worried about gun violence? Almost half of them who responded in this are. More than half of them are by suicide by a student. And almost a half of them using alcohol or drugs. Again, this is why the surveys exist and what we look at. Do we have policies and procedures in place that are helping the students? Again, these are not academic output indicators. These are experience indicators that we're looking at. Social emotional experience. So this one is fascinating because social emotional data is a little bit harder to get because not everyone has it right now. We have a couple pilot schools that pilot districts that are utilizing a social emotional component of that platform. And this is where we pulled this information from. But we were looking at these constructs, meaning these are the areas that are looked at on the students' their emotional well-being. So again, how many strengths do you have? What is your self-efficacy? Grit is one of those indicators inside of the self-management. Your social awareness, your sense of belonging, your classroom effort, your emotional regulations, engagement, learning strategies, social perspective taking, and returning to school. So these are the ones that are used in this platform. Again, this is Panorama, and it's the early warning system pilot that was running this. So these are the constructs that are available and that were asked and that we looked at. And so again, just reviewing the data behind us, we took one school in the state, it was Ogden High School. Again, talked to the district, we reviewed this information. This is just doing a quick view of what that platform looks like, and they look at the social emotional items within that platform. And so we looked at the results behind there and try to say, okay, let's look at the individual students. What is their social emotional indicator? Again, these are self-reported by a survey. And we want to say, okay, looking at this, again, are we seeing any statistical viable empirical data that there is a disproportionate between the different student groups? And we ran it for this group. One of them in particular, we said, okay, let's look at the number of strengths that the students felt that they had. This is just a histogram across of the number or the frequency that the students thought that they had, 0 being the smallest, 11 being the highest. And you can see that it kind of ranges between it. And so as we looked at the number of strengths, we said, okay, that as an indicator, are we seeing doing a statistical test, an impact on it? And basically what we found is the economic disadvantaged students tend to have a higher value, so those who are not economically disadvantaged tend to have higher number of strengths than those who are economically disadvantaged. And that's what the 0 and this 1 down below says. A 1 says they are economically disadvantaged. The 1 on top, or the 0 on top, says they are not. And so you can see kind of, if you look squint, I guess, you can kind of see that chart for the economic disadvantage has a high number and then it slopes out. And then for those students who are not economic disadvantaged, has a slope and it has a jump up there around the around a 5 point, I think I have 5 strengths, and then it kind of starts sloping down again. So kind of a reversal inside of there on that group. And then we looked at self-efficacy, how much students believe they can succeed in achieving academic outcomes. It had a very strong correlation with all the other social emotional learning constructs, which means they're related. And so we use this as an overall proxy to evaluate the impact of social emotional learning students' experience in relations to student demographic groups. So as we took a look at this, again, we saw that for the low income, they're tens. So when we start talking about tens, as we look at the significance or the effect size, yes, we can see it inside of there. And for self-efficacy, yes, those who are not low income have a higher sense than those who are of lower income. Jumping, looks like I only have 2 slides left. Yay. Anyway, so that's the last slide. Basically, what we've run into is then the questions are, 1, is there any evidence to suggest that there are barriers to high quality learning opportunities and improving outcomes among different demographic groups of students that we've tracked? Throwing that question out to you guys. After 60 slides of information, did you see evidence of barriers to high quality learning opportunities? I can see Tracy shaking her head one way. I can't see anyone else. Any thoughts?
Well, Erin, this is Katina again. Sorry, I tend to talk a lot, so stop me at any moment. But I look at this data and I sit here and I'm like, holy crap, right? Because in my school, I run a charter school. So in my school, we focus on students that are learning English. I have 96% of my students that qualify for a free or reduced lunch. So we feed 100% of our children. And this data is hitting really hard. But yet it's what I see. It's what I see every day. I'm also the assessment coordinator for the school. I do those multiple hat things. I just switch them out as I leave my room, my office. But I've been doing the math assessments for my little guys. And my first graders, I mean, half of them are like, you have to do it in Spanish, Miss Santa Maria. And I'm like, I can't. I wish I could, but I can't. And so they just stare at me. And so there's so many factors. You've pointed out so many things. You've got empirical data. You've got a lot of information. But I sit back, I work with the families, I work with the children. There are so many things that happen. And these little guys, on top of everything we've now dealing with COVID, and this last 18 months have hit my kindergartners and my first graders so very, very hard. So very hard. It's going to take a long time to catch these little guys up. Behaviors are out of control. I mean, my teachers that I've had, I have a teacher that has like 16 years of experience, and she was in my office crying because she's like, I've never had a class that's out of control. And we have awesome behaviors in the school in the sense of we have very low, negative behaviors, and we do a big deal about positive behaviors. But yet this year, kindergarten and first grade are like a comment was, we have feral children this year. And it really feels that way with our kindergarten and first grade.
Yeah.
And so we go across the hall, our second graders are doing great. They're in class, they're enjoying, they're talking, their teachers are, and it's just honestly feels like there's another layer on top of these families with COVID that I'm like, how are we going to get out of this? How are we going to move forward? Being able to see this just validates what I see every day. And it's just like, oh my gosh, we have got to figure out a way to really make a difference besides just, okay, let's do it again. Okay, let's, every day, because my staff is wearing out. I am wearing out.
Yeah. And thank you. And let me just state, it's an honor to speak to this group because you guys see this and you go, oh, but in my mind too, I go, and now you can see why you're so important, why these policies, these programs, the Title I programs, why you are in your job. It's so important that you look at the programs that you're running and the practices that you are doing, because your job is to help all the students. I don't know if Becky wants to add anything to beyond that, but the evidence, we say the empirical evidence, we look at this and we say, and so what? What does this mean? It says, well, let's go back to these key questions. What are we doing? What are your practices? And it's critically important too, that you're also not saying, and we're killing our teachers because we're burning them out over, it's like, well, what are our practices and how are we approaching this? It's not about, well, let's just give up. And hopefully no one's feeling that way out or just throw our hands up in the air and give up. No, it's, oh, there is a need. These needs are evidently abundant in multivariate analysis and reviews that, there are students who are struggling. They can learn, they can achieve. There are challenges, absolutely. So that's why we go back to these questions. What are we doing?
I think, Aaron, earlier you kind of said, that people were napping, or it seemed really quiet while you were talking, trying to engage us. But I at the moment, I started typing in the chat and I just deleted it because it's not that we don't have anything to say. I think it's just so heavy that it's hard to verbalize all of what we're seeing and hearing. Coming from a special ed background, these are not new to me. I like that you're sharing this data with us, but we know that kids with IEPs are people of color and disadvantaged groups are overclassified often. Like, this is something that we've been working on for so long. So what's hardest for me to digest is, even though we've been working on this for so long, and we have processes and programs and policies and procedures in place to prevent this overclassification, here we are learning that despite all of those efforts, we're trending kind of the same. And that I don't know if that's what other administrators are seeing from this data, but it kind of feels like that to me. And so it's hard to digest. And I'm glad that you're here. And I think 12-year study is huge, but it's also just a lot to disaggregate in my own brain and emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. And again, I just saw that there's like all kinds of comments in there. Again, let's, and I think I saw a comment say, we should break this down by the LEA level. And I'm like, yes. Again, and then another question was, hey, are the assessment directors learning how to do this? And some of you who wear both hats, like, I haven't learned yet. It's like, it's coming. I met with a group actually last week. We did the initial review, and Darren has me coming to the next assessment director to do a presentation. So just know that that's coming. But let me just state a couple other things. At a state level, for the staff at USBE to look at this and say, okay, what do we have? Again, those numbers are large, and it's really hard to move a needle at the state. If someone, if a board member or a politician says, and we're going to increase graduation, well, here's the good one. We're going to take the average ACT score of our students. I'm making up numbers. I know kind of where it's at. Let's say it's a 18.3. And they say, and my job is we're going to move that from 18.3 up to 21. And we're going to do it in 2 years. I'll say, okay, you're going to do a massive amount of disruption in the system somewhere, because that movement is nigh impossible at a state level. It's not impossible at a school when programs are well executed. We can see in the turnaround groups, in the CSI groups, when we look at those studies and the performance of those schools who are struggling, and they've got, feels like the deck sometimes is stacked against them. But when they say, and we're focusing on these practices and these programs, you watch their numbers just take off, and it's awesome to see. So I'm just sharing with you is, again, we look at the numbers, state level, sometimes that's daunting. Some people think, we got to move the whole state. That's hard. When I say that's hard, we're talking about massive amount of education disruption to the system somewhere to say, and we're going to split out all these things and focus on one area. And that's next to impossible to do, because there's so much going on in the education of our students. And one indicator is not a good indicator of the whole student's growth, the whole student's education process. hopefully the benefit of what I'm sharing with you too is, yes, we can see that there's a gap. 2, we know best practices have massive impact on students. So anyway, thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Aaron. A couple of questions. Kendra from Duchesne District. She's asking if you have the data for 2021, if you've looked at that. She said they're finding a significant drop, and she's curious if that drop is statewide.
What are you, did I stop sharing? No, I didn't. Are you seeing my screen still? I can't-
Yeah,
Sorry.
I
yeah,
can't tell what I'm sharing. All right, you're like, and you have 2021 in there. Yes.
okay.
This is preliminary. So the science data, so we have 6th, 7th, and 8th inside of here. So we look at the science data, that's what we're seeing here. I have 2021 highlighted at the moment. This is the same study as we're looking at it. And so the question is, are we seeing a difference? Because, hey, there's a gap in between 19 and 2021. And so again, we looked at the same approach. So as you can see, as I'm jumping between 19 and 21, what is the effect size? Again, we're not looking at the percent proficient. We're looking at, okay, did we see a change in the gap that was alarming? Now, let me just show over here.
Erin, just so you know, she made another comment that talked about the behavior inputs and specifically the incident report, and wondered if you had some connection to that side too.
Yes. Have we had a chance to analyze the behavioral data and the input that came in? Not yet. We're still trying to just do head counts, by the way, because that's October 1's in 2 days. So anyway, great question. Yes, we're looking at it. Let me just highlight a trend that we're seeing inside of here, a state level closing of the gap trend. The effect size is still big. But you'll see with the the Latino Hispanic group over 7 years. So 2014, 2021, again, there's a gap in there. But what we've seen is this trend is starting, it appears to decrease. It's gone from 1.4 to 1, still big. That's a good indicator that things are at the needle is actually moving. Again, this is a state level view of the data. So that's encouraging when I look at this. And this, by the way, is English language arts. If I jump over to mathematics, that trend also holds. It's not as drastic. And if I jump to science, again, science is not complete yet. So we have to be careful here, but we also can see that trend is also decreasing. That's fantastic news right there. We can see a group there's an improvement going on inside of there. Native Americans, I don't like the trend, the way it's going. Just being honest with as I look at that one scares me. And in particular, the pandemic and the Native American group, that one's quite alarming. That's increasing in a pattern or a direction that is very much worrisome. So again, this is looking at the mathematics. So great question. Have we looked at this? Yes, we're in the process of doing also a very large study of what was, looking at the impact on COVID, the different schedule types, the participation rates, the proficiency amounts. We're doing what they call a skip year growth, where we're using 19 and 20. It's not going to be used for accountability, but we're trying to say, can we use that as an indicator to help us determine, are the kids performing against like students? Is it better? Is it the same? Is it flat? What's going on inside of there? So, and that's not done. Anyway, does that help?
Thank you, Erin. Anna Pesci from Mana Academy had a question, and she said with the all races category, is that also broken down by race, or is it just white, black, and all other races?
It's all races. So, and that's 0 because it's the whole student group. That means everyone. Great question. And that's why that one's 0, because that's your, if you will, your baseline. And then everyone we can see, so the white is then slightly above it, and the multiple race above, kind of bouncing back and forth, Hispanic. So good question. That is inclusive of all students. And then you can see what's the divergent away from that all student group. Good question.
And we just had some comments thanking you for the clarification, and let's see, who was this? It was Carrie from Murray School District saying, schools have received a lot of negative press lately, or it's being seen as political. It would be interesting to see how this data looks when comparing identity affirming versus non-identity affirming schools. Do those actions make a difference to student achievement and to happiness?
That's a great question. I don't think I have the data at this moment to say, let's look at that. But that is a very interesting question.
Erin, I want to thank you for your time today. You're always so gracious whenever we ask you to come and meet with this group. And we always learn a lot from all the work that you're doing. Erin's really an amazing colleague that we have at USBE, and we're really fortunate that we have him that's to lead up our data and statistics section at the office. So thank you so much, Erin.
You're absolutely welcome. And again, obviously we're here to help where we can. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Let's take a quick 10-minute break, and that will give Val a little bit of extra time. So let's come back at, let's see, what time is it? 10, my phone is saying 10:17. So if you can be back at 10:27, we'll go ahead and get started with Val's presentation.
Okay. Becky, I assume you're okay with me leaving?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Erin. You're so
Absolutely.
generous.
Thanks,
And
Erin.
you're welcome. And again, if there's a question, route it through Becky or someone and it'll get to me.
I said, well, be prepared. It's going to tell me I don't have a job.
What was that?
Oh, you can babysit the baby then. I'm looking for a babysitter.
So just real quickly, let's, because I'm going to meet with the teachers afterwards about this.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a nice break. We're going to now turn the time over to Val Murdoch, and she will do a presentation on highly qualified paraprofessionals for Title I schools, and then you'll also have an opportunity to meet in some breakout rooms to discuss, and then come back and share some information with the whole group. So Val, I'll turn the time to you.
Thank you, Becky, and hello, everyone. It's so good to be with you, even if it's through the interwebs. If you're like me and you're ready to log off as soon as we go into breakout rooms, I would just invite you to hold off on that fight or flight response and stick with us Until that point, you can then choose to join a breakout room if you would like. And I surely hope that you do, because we have received a lot of excellent feedback already on things that might help LEAs recruit and retain highly qualified and highly effective paraprofessionals. Utah LEAs spend millions of dollars on paraprofessionals, millions of their Title I funds on paraprofessionals. So I think it's really important that we have this conversation. As we conduct monitoring visits, we've heard over the last few years that there are LEAs that are having a hard time recruiting and retaining enough paraprofessionals to meet the needs that they've identified in their Title I programs. So to start off, I would like to share with you, because I have enjoyed the teacher clarity classes and trainings that we've been part of. The learning intention is for you to analyze how changes made to the way the highly qualified status of paraprofessionals is determined could help and or hinder the recruitment and retention of highly qualified and highly effective paraprofessionals. And to do that, you need to be able to identify how No Child Left Behind requirements and the ESEA amendment of the ESEA are connected. You also will need to be familiar with those that participated in the survey, what they said. You will need to be able to compare and contrast the two different passing scores that people have proposed, as well as compare and contrast the Parapro assessment that is currently being used with other assessments. And then finally, if you choose, no pressure, engage in breakout room discussions. Let's start off with what ESEA amended the ESEA to say. And I've grayed out some areas just to highlight the most important parts. That state educational agency, so USBE, will ensure that paraprofessionals meet applicable state certification requirements. And so that's the change that ESEA made to No Child Left Behind. Nothing else. All the other requirements stayed in place. What No Child Left Behind said was LEAs could determine the requirements in the certification process. So later on, you see in the next section, the state qualifications were in place on the day before the date of an enactment of the Every Student Succeeds Act. And that would be the No Child Left Behind. So going to that part, if a paraprofessional does not meet the educational requirements of completing at least 2 years, 48 hours, semester hours of higher institution study, or has an associate degree or higher, then they must meet a rigorous standard of quality and can demonstrate through formal state, and you see it crossed out, or local academic assessment, that they have a knowledge of and the ability to assist in instructing as appropriate, either those students who are already reading, writing, and doing math, or those that are getting ready to that, somewhere in their early stages of reading, writing, and math development. So before we get into the survey results, there were questions that have to do with the ESEA. One question an LEA asked is, could the highly qualified status be waived if a para has been employed as a substitute for a period of time or in another position in our LEA? And no, Title I is very strict when it comes to Title I paraprofessional requirements. They must be highly qualified. And then, is there an updated USBE paraeducator manual? I'm so glad you asked. That was updated in 2019, and it's being updated again because of the change in board rule, mostly because of special ed reasons. That is there is a work group that meets regularly. And in fact, we would love for one or two of you to join us in that working group to represent Title I paraprofessionals. The best way to let us know that you're interested in that is to email me. The meetings right now are once a week, and that's a heavy load, as I know. If you're able to do that, just let me know what you're available for. If you can't meet regularly, but you would be a reviewer when the updates are ready, let me know that as well. We would appreciate having Title I representation. Another reason why some LEAs might want to look for alternatives to Parapro is because we've heard some Parapro woes. The hardest part, and these are quotes, direct quotes, the hardest part of the Parapro is administering the test. Another LEA said, we have difficulty getting locations for the Parapro. Now this is versus the opposite. You're going to see this as we go through. People have totally different views of the Parapro and of what we should do to solve the highly qualified status. So this LEA said, administering the Parapro goes very smoothly for us. And I put in the gray section of the slide the response that we received from ETS that runs the Parapro, their technical services. It requires the Java 32-bit version rather than the 62-bit version. But they have found that the 32-bit and 64-bit versions can reside on the same computer as long as the 32-bit version is installed first. So that might help those of you who have ongoing problems. Oh, I forgot to say, if you have questions, please unmute and just shout them out right now. You can put them in the comments if you would like, but I may or may not see those. For those of you who have ongoing problems or questions, I have the contact information for you. I'm going to put that in the chat. Let's see. It's spaced out quite nicely. Becky Peters will also send out the slides that are presented today, and my slides will be in a PDF, so you'll have their contact information. If you have any problems as you're administering the test, please contact Jim or Dave. So just a little bit on the survey that we sent out to LEAs. That was sent out the first week of August. So some of you might have already been inundated with preparations of this school year, and some of you might have still been resting. We received 65 responses, all were anonymous, and assuming that the responses represent different LEAs, that would be a response rate of 43%. So hopefully it represents a lowish sampling bias. There were 4 items. The first item asked, how would your LEA be impacted if the required minimum score on the Parapro were reduced from 460 to 455? And you see the majority, almost half, but half, 46% said it would have a positive impact, and then 44% said it would have not a positive nor a negative. They were pretty neutral on that. So that represents about 90% of respondents. There were 2 respondents that represent 3% that said it would have a negative impact on their LEA. And I do want to point out here that it is possible for the state to have a requirement and the LEA to have a more rigorous, stringent requirement. You can't be more flexible, but you can be more restrictive. So if the state decided to go to 455, then the districts that wanted, or the charters that wanted to stay at 460 certainly could do that. Then you see these other pieces of the pie. Those are individual responses that I just want to highlight here. Those who are not passing are getting much lower than 460. For those whose first language is not English, ETS offers extended time if required paperwork is submitted. Another LEA said, define benefit. We would be able to hire more less qualified individuals. Another LEA, LEAs who adopt the lower score would be negatively impacted. And finally, all LEAs would be negatively impacted. Well, what does ETS say about the passing rates at the two different scores? I got those data from ETS, and you can see Utah has about 86% of its paraprofessionals passing at 460 and doing much better than the national rate. And then if that were lowered to 455, the number that would be passing out of the 754 that took it last year would be 91%. So about a 5% change. So you may think that's huge, or you may think that's negligible. ETS seemed to think that was significant. So that was the first consideration. Would it be helpful to even change the score in the first place? Another consideration is, what does that translate in number of questions? Well, depending on the form of the test that the paraprofessional is taking, that would result in about 4 to 6 questions that they could miss, additional questions. Consideration 3 is, this comes from ETS, is it within 2 standard errors of measurement of the expert recommended passing score? And I hadn't heard back from ETS about if their recommended passing score is 460. I believe it is. They said that one SEM, one SEM is 3.4 points on the score scale. So 2 would be 6.8, and a 5-point change would be considered reasonable. The fourth consideration is the proposed change in score within the range of passing scores used by other states and agencies that use the test for the same purpose. And so I created this chart of Western states so we can compare ourselves to those around us. And you see the majority do use about approximately 460. Oregon uses 455. The spread for all states is 450. Louisiana uses 450, and then up from Louisiana would be 455. So 450 is quite low when comparing to the rest of the states. And then there are some districts in Texas that use 467. The US Virgin Islands requires 466. So that's the spread there. Item 2 on the survey asked, does your LEA have interest in using a different assessment to qualify paraprofessionals other than the Parapro? Approximately 50% said yes on this one. And then about 25%, so 75 either said yes or not right now, possibly in the future. And 17% were saying it's working well for us, and we don't really have interest in trying to bring on something else. And then the other pieces of the pie, individual responses, let's go over those quickly. A question, how does 70% on the, I'm sorry, I'm just assuming you know what I'm talking about when I say another test. The para-educator assessment is by master teacher. And we had an LEA reach out to us and ask if they could use this because it did come with video trainings, etc. And it could potentially be cheaper, and I'll show you the breakdown in the next slide. But one question was, how does 70%, which is recommended on this assessment, compare with the current Parapro cut score? And I'll get to that in a couple of slides. The next one is, do paras have to take the courses in order to access the tests? And according to master teacher, no, they do not. They can just take the test. Who would teach the courses? They are in 2 different forms. If an LEA if this were approved and an LEA were to purchase a license, then they could access the videos or they could access the tests, the texts of the training. And is there a timeline for completion? The licenses would be for 1 year, so it would be a 1 year. But you you also have to say the timeline would be your paraprofessional, if working in a Title I program, needs to be highly qualified. So that's your timeline right there. And then one LEA said if it's cheaper, then they would consider that. So let's look at the comparison. And I know that this is a very busy slide, and I apologize for that. So 3 different assessments: the Parapro, the Paraeducator, and then Work Keys by ACT is used by some states, not very many, because it's not specifically for paraprofessionals. It doesn't have that component of knowledge of working in classrooms and supporting instruction. So I have a test design column and then a cost column. So Parapro, most of you are familiar, has 90 multiple choice questions, and the participant has 2.5 hours to take it, broken down into knowledge of the academic content, as well as applying the skills in the classroom. It's $55. They do have a virtual remote option. If it's done at home, it's much more expensive because they proctor it. There are free materials online, but there's also a 90-day subscription, and that's $19 per person. So that's about $75 per test. The Paraeducator by Master Teacher has 105 true false, multiple choice, multiple response. There's no time limit. There are free retakes. Again, it's broken down about 30% is knowledge of supporting instruction, and 75 is the academic knowledge. You see it is more expensive for depending on the number of tests that are taken. So if you're a small LEA, it may not be financially better situation. The break-even point would be approximately 25 paras taking that test. It reduces the cost to 49. Site licenses are extra. So a site license that would allow an LEA to have up to 38 paraprofessionals take the test would cost about $1,600 per year. And then Work Keys, again, I don't know that this really gets to what you would want the paraprofessional to demonstrate. It has a applied math component. It has, instead of reading, it's interpreting workplace documents, and it's business writing. So a total of 2.5 hours for $46. And then if one of the tests were not passed, but the other 2 were, then they could just take the one test that wasn't passed. And that a site license is the same for any LEA. That would be $2,000 a year. I'm looking to see if there are any questions. Please feel free to unmute, ask them in the chat. Stay silent.
Val, there is one question from Carrie in Murray District. She says, for paras who took the Parapro ages ago and no longer have their scores, is there a way to look the scores up?
There is, I think ETS charges to do that. Can anybody confirm that that's had that experience?
Hi Val, this is Katina. We did have someone needing to do that. It's been a while, and they did have to pay for it. I just don't remember the details of the amount or any of that.
Okay, I'm happy to find that out. As you can imagine, these companies are willing to send us all the information they can, since it's money that goes into their coffers. Any other questions on that comparison? Getting back to the question on how does the 70% on the Paraeducator compare to the cut score on the Parapro? Master Teacher sets a minimum of 65% on the 2 portions of their assessment. Most states require paraeducator, paraprofessionals get 70% on the academic portion of it and 65 on the supporting instruction, only because, and I asked the master teacher representative this, they said that it's a shorter test, 30 items, and so missing a few on that could impact the score much more quickly than the 75 items on the other one. And so they thought that that was why states accepted a lower score on that section. The Parapro, to get the required percentage, a paraprofessional would have to answer 44 to 49 questions correctly out of the 72 to 75 scored questions. It's interesting that they have 15 or more experimental questions if it's a 90 item exam. So that breaks down to about 61 to 65%. So it's somewhat comparable as far as percentage goes. I don't know as far as which one is more difficult. The third item on the survey that we sent out was, does your LEA have interest in any underqualified paras taking part in Weber State University's ParaCert program? Becky and I were contacted by Weber State, or forwarded the email, because they had 30 scholarships that they were giving out. And so we just wanted to make people aware of that. Initially, when they approached us, they advertised it as a way to help paraprofessionals pass the Parapro. And we thought, well, if they're taking college classes and they're meeting the requirements, then why would they have to take a test on top of that? So first of all, let's go over the interest, and then I'll tell you the rest of the story. So fewer LEAs were interested in this option. About a third were. 40% more said not now, possibly in the future, and 14% said no. And then you see there are a lot of individual responses. It looks good, but it would be difficult to require someone to put that much time and effort into it without paying. That's what the next comment says. And the next comment talks about USU having a similar program, which I'm so glad this person mentioned it, because I compared the two briefly. USU has a 2-year program with 33 credits, and they do have intro to writing, they have academic prose and college algebra. So they have classes that a paraprofessional would have to pass that would meet those rigorous assessment requirements. Weber State, unfortunately, does not. When we received the syllabi for their courses, they did not have math, reading, or writing as far as an academic content. This is what they did. Oops, I think I skipped some comments. We would like to train them in-house. And then if the courses were free, so there were 30 scholarships, the cost of the Parapro is our primary obstacle. They have their coursework looks very interesting. It looks very helpful. It's offered online, on-site, in some of their satellite campuses. When asked how long it would take to complete this, the professor said some people could do all of the credits in a summer. That does not sound like a fun summer. But they also said they could spread it out over 2 semesters or 3 semesters. Does Weber State's program meet the highly qualified requirements? Because of that, not helping the paraprofessional demonstrate knowledge of academic content, then no, not on its own. They could take those classes would then they would count if they wanted to go on and get a teaching certificate. They would have that base of classes that they could count 18 credits to go toward that. For those LEAs that are really focused on growing their own teachers, this obviously would help them in that respect, but not necessarily to meet the highly qualified requirements. The last item on the survey it was just to provide additional feedback, and I got a lot. So I put them into themes. The first one was on pay. I thought people made some really excellent points here. We're having a hard time competing with fast food restaurants, Walmart. Our problem is with affordable housing. If you think of areas like Moab, Heber, Park City, Morgan, the cost of living, no one could afford rent with a paraprofessional salary. So the next person talks about perhaps we should focus on ways to pay paras a better hourly wage so we can hire quality people. Another person was thinking about the teacher student support, TSSA, forgot what it stands for, success. Use 55% of those funds to increase pay for paras. And another person was thinking similarly, less restrictive funding streams. The next group of comments I put into the theme of coursework support as far as a packaged course that paraprofessionals could take. What if each LEA developed its own paraeducator proficiencies that work for their context, and USBE would set the standard of rigor? So again, there would need to be the valid and reliable assessment of the academic knowledge to go along with their supporting instruction knowledge, that background. A Canvas course with modules, online modules, badge options. So remember, the state, the USBE does not keep track of paraprofessional qualifications. That's why LEAs are tasked with keeping track of having proof of the highly qualified status of their paraprofessionals for Title I. And then this commenter said they like the master teacher or Weaver state options because we could possibly tie some of the credentials to increased lanes. And this LEA was focused on growing their own. And then the last comments did not have a common theme. Again, the cost of the exam keeps coming up. I do want to point out that LEAs can use Title I funds to help to pay the cost of the exam. Obviously, if a paraprofessional is failing and needing to repeat the exam, that may not be the best use of Title I funds. The math portion is the biggest headache. And then right after that, the next comment, our challenge is paras who are amazing at working with kids in math, but have a challenge due to language barrier on the test. Why would you want people working with your students who do not have basic reading, writing, math skills? And you could see that they only need to get 61 to 65% and 86% are passing it. We provide a lot of support and training for our paras in-house, but I still believe it should be a priority to hire paras who have a certain level of academics. And as Erin pointed out, well, with all those data, if we're depending on our paraprofessionals to help decrease the gaps, then we should definitely be hiring people who have qualifications. Okay, for those introverts, I'm going to ask you to be brave and join a breakout room and discuss what changes, if any, would help LEAs recruit and retain highly qualified and effective paraprofessionals. I've given you some talking points of lowering the passing score, adding additional assessments as an option, additional ways paraprofessionals could meet the ESEA highly qualified requirements, and then funding budgeting ideas. Okay. So I'm going to put the overall question in the chat for you, and then Becky Peters is going to give us some breakout rooms, and those breakout rooms look like this. It should look like this. I'm just seeing a list. Oh, you have to scroll all the way down to find the four rooms. So charter LEAs outside of Salt Lake County, charter LEAs within Salt Lake County, district LEAs in rural areas, district LEAs in suburban and urban areas. If you would scroll down to the bottom of that list and join one, if you want to join a different one, you're welcome to do that. You're going to have 15 minutes, Becky Peters, if you would set that timer.
Looks like I needed to do that ahead of time, so I'll just keep an eye on the clock and we can manually ask people to come back.
Okay, thanks, Becky.
Where are we accessing the breakout rooms?
You should have a pop-up. If you click on Zoom down at the bottom.
Yeah, I've got it. I clicked it and I don't have a pop-up that came up.
In my case, Deborah, I need to click on the more button and then there's a breakout room that pops up from there.
The more.
Because my screen wasn't
Oh,
quite
there
big
we
enough.
go. I see it.
Arlene, I hope that helps you too.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question.
I'm still not seeing the more. Is that over the 3 little dots? Is that?
Yeah, 3 little dots.
Okay, when I tap on that, it's not, nothing's coming. View options.
And if anyone needs help, I can help put them in their desired meeting room if you'd like.
So Becky, can you just put me in the rural schools area one, the LEAs with rural areas?
Okay.
Oh, great.
And Michelle, I'm glad you don't have this problem, but is this charter or LEA? So we have 2 groups for districts and 2 groups for charters. And the problem is for both charters and districts. So if you want to join a room, Becky Peters, I don't know, Michelle, if you want to join a room.
Yeah, it's just a matter of let me know which one to put people in and I can help out.
Oh, yeah. Don't. Michelle's driving, so don't worry about it. Well, we can put you in a room and you can be in on the conversation. Welcome, Ted.
How are you? Where do we go here?
Do you see a selection of breakout rooms?
Okay, I will head into those.
Okay, we have about 7 minutes left. We're talking about paraprofessionals and how to determine their highly qualified status.
Great, thanks.
Sure. Hi, Janice, welcome. Janice, I don't know if you're just joining or rejoining.
I'm just joining. It was a busy morning. Are we on schedule for, I'm mostly interested in the TSI.
Oh, okay. We're running ahead of schedule, but TSI I think will start about 11:30.
Oh, okay, great. Since I missed this topic, I will just hang tight until breakouts are done.
Okay.
I'm gonna look over the PowerPoint that you sent earlier and see what I've missed and hopefully get all caught up. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm going to welcome Bridget. Bridget, are you just joining or are you rejoining? Anyway, Bridget, just so you know what we're doing, we're in breakout rooms and you're welcome to join any of the groups, but specifically since you're in at Gateway Prep, you could join the charters outside the Salt Lake County. We're discussing paraprofessionals, or you can choose not to join the group.
Okay, hi Val. I think I'll have to pass because we're trying to finish up our Acadians testing. And I was hoping maybe I could just listen while I was working on some things, but I'll just plan a time where I can watch the whole meeting and the recording.
Well, you're welcome to do that. Breakout rooms will end in approximately 2 minutes.
Okay.
And after that, you can listen to other LEAs and their discussion about paraprofessionals. And then our school improvement team will be discussing some updates at 11:30. So it's totally up to you.
Okay. All right. Perfect. I will try and listen in then. If
Okay.
Everything seems calm here. Thanks so much.
Good to see you.
You too.
Becky P., how are we doing? How much time?
I think we actually have 3 or 4 more minutes. I believe I noted 11:12 as the return time.
Okay. And will they get a warning, maybe a 1 minute warning?
Since we didn't have a time set on there, that's one thing I'm still learning about breakout rooms is what we can actually do when we have a live meeting going on. They won't get an automatic warning. We do have the option of sending out a broadcast minute message saying we're going to close it out in a minute type of thing, and then
okay,
can wrap things up.
Okay, I see that option. Thank you. Will you do that at 11 in 2 minutes at 11:11? Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I did send out that message and it's been about a minute. Should I just go ahead and close out the rooms?
Yeah, thank you, Becky. Well, welcome back. Thank you all for that chose to join a breakout room. So let's hear from the charter LEAs outside of Salt Lake County first. What if someone would summarize your discussion?
Sorry, Val, who did you call for?
The charter LEAs outside of Salt Lake County.
Val, I was in that group.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
I was gonna say, Susie or I probably, we talked the most, but we just mainly talked about the fact that we wanted to make the payment higher for the paras, and that we wanted to really work on building them into the community in order to retain them over the years. And that was one of our biggest frustrations that we were facing. And then we also talked about the test and how we wanted to possibly, make a secure test environment within our school that they could use if needed, or purchase materials besides Chromebooks, obviously, because I don't work on there. And that's pretty much what we talked about. But yeah, that trying to retain them and really make them part of the community is what we've been facing. So.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I appreciate that. And I know for charters like Scholar Academy, just conducting the test yourself can be an added complication. And so trying to figure that out, there's no cost, but there definitely is a lot of detail in that. So there are several district LEAs that have figured it out well, and I can connect you with those people if you have questions. So we can do that. Let's go ahead and go to charters within Salt Lake County. Who's willing to report out?
Yes, I can. I feel bad because I'm like, we had a good conversation, but I tend to talk a lot. So, okay, we talked about a couple of things. One is that it's not necessarily the test or the scores we're having trouble with as a group. It's more the actual fact of having paraprofessionals because of the wage competition within the city and just around the neighborhoods and things like that. So actually getting individuals into the schools is the concern, not necessarily the test scores. We're fine with the test scores. In fact, that's not the concern. The concern is actually getting people in and staying within the school. So there were some suggestions about encouraging our families and having families participate and finding within that family group potential employees, as well as having current employees share it out with their groups of friends and their families, and having those come in as well. There's always pitfalls with having too many family members working within an LEA, but being able to spread the word around. We talked about hiring practices as far as where are we advertising. That may be a concern as to just getting the word out that we need people. And it's not necessarily always the wage itself. It's just that, for the example I gave, is that I have some really awesome paras, but they're getting poached. Their previous employers and other, schools or things are offering more than I can. And so I have a great person that she's like, they just offered me $5 more an hour, full-time with everything that I wanted when I left that they couldn't offer. Now, 5 months later, they can offer. And I can't match that. And so it's just that sense of feeling that we're constantly competing with what's happening around as far as wages.
Some excellent points. The advertising part is a really good point in making sure those, the requirements are there, but also the support to help you, help the paraprofessional get there. Thank you, Katina. Let's go to our district LEAs in rural areas. I think that was our largest group.
I can try to summarize. What we decided is that everyone who applies for a job, we put them in a drawing for a new car. I think what we discovered was similar to the other groups. A competitive salary was important, but a lot of other businesses could outcompete what districts could afford. But a few things that I noticed that were suggested is, advertising the benefits within the district of a schedule that fits your child's schedule, the holidays, the summer off, so we can hit that particular population. Also reaching out to the parents within the individual schools and trying to find people that would be vested in the school. Those are a few things. Those are in that group. If I'm sure there's some other things I didn't mention that you could mention though.
Thanks, Steve. Is there anyone else that was in Steve's group that would like to add to what he said?
Well, I know we did talk about just flexible hours. If paras are only able to work 2 days a week instead of 5, we're going to match that schedule and take up a greater degree of flexibility on our part. Was one thing.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, making it as attractive as possible. Anyone else in that large group? If not, we'll move on to district LEAs in suburban and urban areas.
So Val, I'd be happy to kind of speak to that. We actually just commiserated on our woes about the fact that we haven't figured out the magic bullet on recruitment and retention, because St. George said that there's the Arby's and I think the 7-Eleven or whatever, they have every day they're increasing their help wanted sign by $1, trying to get their workforce retention and recruitment up. So, it's just hard to find the right people. And they've come up with some really creative ways of offering like a suburban to their more out in rural areas and saying like, you know, here we'll concentrate your hours between Tuesday and Thursday. We have a Suburban for you that you can use to commute out. You don't have to use the wear and tear on your car, some of those kind of strategies. But right now, and we've increased our hours to go under the 30 at most of our schools, but really it's a matter of the pool is just really shallow right now to find people to fill the jobs. So we didn't have any great answers to that troubling situation because there's just a lack of workforce really. You know, all of our bigger districts here in the urban areas are offering their own parapro test locations. Maria is the smallest, so we just tag on to Granite. We're like a little leech onto them. And that works for us because we're super close to them. So it's just a really tricky time with our economy. So that's what we discussed in our group. Thank you.
Thank you, Missy. Anyone else in the suburban urban group that would like to add? Anyone from any group that has anything else to add?
I have a question, Val. It's not really adding to it, but how much time are we given if we have people that are hired that are not qualified?
That would be something that you would put in your either a policy or procedures for hiring paraprofessionals for Title I schools. If it's more than a month or two, then you would be out of compliance because any paraprofessional getting paid with Title I funds would need to be highly qualified. So if you could point to a policy or procedure and you're saying we're following it, and if they're not highly qualified within 30 days, 60 days, then they will not be retained.
Okay, and then clarification on that. When you say Title I funds, so if we have a school-wide program, but Title I funds are only being used to hire, you know, we may be hiring paras and with other funding.
That's a great point, Arlene, because you have school-wide programs,
right.
All professionals need to be highly qualified, yeah.
So it doesn't matter whether they're Title I funds. That's
correct. I misspoke. I think I was thinking more.
I just want to make sure I understood that correctly. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any conversations around lowering the test score or adding the paraeducator? Sounds like you were getting actually to the problem, the root cause. If you do have individual thoughts that you want to express, please don't hesitate to contact me, call me, contact Becky Donaldson. We certainly are happy to try to make recruiting and retaining paraprofessionals easier than it currently is, but you all have unique situations, and you know the ideas that you've come up with are excellent and ways to make the job of being a paraprofessional both rewarding, you know, compared to working in a fast food restaurant. No disrespect to fast food restaurants, but the reward that one could experience in helping students, the flexibility in schedule, and focusing on that could help.
Hey, Val.
Yeah.
I just noticed your phone number. It might be missing a digit.
It probably is. It's missing a 5 at the end. Thank you, Tracy.
Yep, in case people want to reach you. Thank you.
Yeah. And I will wrap up there unless anybody else has additional questions. And then see some of you this afternoon if you have specific desktop monitoring instrument questions. And remember, even though Utah Grants is not open with the Title I application, the DMI is wide open and you're able to submit that anytime. So thank you all so much for your input and for all you do for students.
Thank you, Val, and thank you for the opportunity for people to meet in in breakout rooms. There were some really great discussions in the room that I was in. So we're going to turn the time over now to our wonderful school improvement team. Tracy Van Deventer, who is the director of the USBE Center for Continuous School Improvement, and as well as Max Lang and Leslie Evans, who are the two school improvement specialists.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen and jump in. You should be seeing a PowerPoint. Is that true?
Yeah, we're seeing it, Tracy.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Thank you everybody for lasting with us to this point in our meeting. I'm going to try to give you as much like happy, positive send-off energy as we can, because I'm so excited about the West Egg call. And I'm hoping at the end of this, for those of you who have already signed up for the 4 domains call, you're going to be like, yes, we made the right decision, because this is very cool. And then I'm hoping that those of you who maybe haven't signed up are going to choose to sign up, because this is a very powerful reporting and feedback option that we have in Utah. And we have some licenses left. So we wanted to use this time to share with you some of the highlights about the program and to make sure that you knew more about what's available, and some additional screenshots of some of the reporting and feedback choices. So this is primarily was focused for our TSI schools and making sure that our TSI schools knew a little more about what was working and maybe not working as well within their buildings. But we also recognize that it's filling a gap we have because we don't have the data right now. And TSI schools that are Title I will become CSI schools if we are not able to elevate those student groups. So we're hoping that this is one other way that you can look at some of the work that's taking place in your building. And we're so grateful for you to stay with us and be with us right now. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at this survey reporting tool. We've got, of course, the tool wrapped around our 4 domains for rapid school improvement. And this is the framework for school improvement that Utah is focused on: turnaround leadership, talent development, instructional transformation, and culture shift. And those 4 are kind of the stool. And if you don't have one of those in place, it is possible that your little stool could kind of tip over, because you need all 4 to really develop and maintain that school improvement. And within those 4 domains, we've got individual practices, and those practices go a little deeper into the actual work that needs to take place in your building. So for instance, if you look at 1.2, monitor short and long-term goals, that's part of the leadership domain. And if you look at like 4.2, for instance, solicit and act upon stakeholder input, that's another piece that's looking at the culture. And this reporting and feedback tool will give you some very in-depth information based around the domains and the practices. Now, this is a sample school view. So this Lincoln Elementary, which is not from Utah, went ahead and had their staff, that's all the teachers and the paraprofessionals and administration, they answered the questions, and it takes about 30 minutes. If it was me, I'd probably pull my whole staff together into a faculty meeting and we would sit down and do this together. But it's set up in a really powerful rubric format. So you would see where all the choices of where your school could be within each of those practices, and then you make the decision about what you've actually witnessed. So it takes a little longer than some surveys. But what's nice is even those people who participate, when they walk away after having done that, they know in their mind what the next steps are within that rubric. And it's really kind of a professional learning opportunity as well. Now, in this school's view, you can see the turnaround leadership, talent development, instructional transformation, culture shift. Those are those 4 domains. And then the practices are broken down below. And in this case, this school's doing very well in 1.3. As we look at 1.3, it looks like they're doing well with customizing and target support to meet the needs of students. But they might be struggling a little more at 1.2. And as we remember, 1.2 was monitor short and long-term goals. And the reason that these are colored this way is this is how far either below or above the average in the nation. So we've got the average score for the call here. And then if this is statistically, right? If it's below one standard deviation above, then it's kind of a light green. If it's one full standard deviation above, it becomes a darker green. And the same is true for the red. You can see there's a light red and then a darker red. That just shows how far below you might be with compared to the average in the nation. You can see they've got some other areas that they're kind of close, but then a couple that they're struggling with. So this is information that the leadership team can use to make changes to their school improvement and maybe change some practices within the building. Now, this is a view that district leaders would see, and they would be able to see the responses of all the elementaries within their district. And that's kind of nice because you can see as a district person, oh, we've got some patterns that are evolving here. For instance, talent development 2.2, that's an area that our schools are struggling in right now based on our feedback report that we're getting. But I can see that some of our schools are doing a little better in 1.3. And as I look across the way, I can see Washington Elementary seems to be more stable and solid above the average of the nation compared to maybe some of the other schools listed here. This is, again, a snapshot across time, but it is representative of what people have had a chance to see as they've been working in your building. This is a great tool for districts to be able to look and see where they could put their resources. The same will be true for us at the state. By having a significant number of schools participate in this, we're going to be able to see where do we have a need for more professional learning and where do we have a need maybe to back off because things seem to be pretty strong and we could maybe allocate those resources into a different way. That's also true for you at the LEA level as well.
Tracy, Steve from Iron County has a question, and that is, do non-Title I schools qualify to use this tool?
Great question. Thanks for bringing that up. Non-Title I schools can participate in the call if they are a TSI school. So you have to be a TSI, CSI, or turnaround school, or you have to be a Title I school. Thank you for clarifying. Good question. The next section we've got is the district level, and this is actually reflecting on the LEA's work. So if you have a multi-school LEA, you would be able to have your building leaders and your LEA leaders fill out a survey that's unique and specific to the work and the services that your LEA is providing. So in this case, this is actually the districts or the LEA's feedback about their ways that they're serving schools. And in this case, the district is doing really well in talent development, pretty well in instructional transformation, but struggling a little bit in the culture shift, especially in 4.2, which is listening to stakeholder feedback. So that's good information for the district people themselves to be able to receive. Now, here's a sample of a dashboard for an individual school, just to give you a quick peek. They are going to give you areas of strength. Again, that's dependent upon the average, areas of needs or challenges that you're facing. You can view by each domain how that information breaks down, and then you can look at the top 10 individual questions and the bottom 10 questions. This is not in comparison to the average. This is just the lowest scoring, but then you can get down to the very smallest finite piece if you chose to and wanted to go a little deeper in regards to the feedback that your employees gave you. This is a domain practice section. So you can see here, this is 1.1, maintaining a school-wide focus, but here's kind of a cool thing. Maybe this isn't what you see in your building, but I know for myself, when I was a building level people, sometimes people would nod and smile and look at me and they would I'd think everybody be on board, but then there's a parking lot talk that happens. And sometimes that's different than what I'm seeing. So here I can see that administration thinks things are going pretty well. Support staff, about the middle, but the teachers are not seeing some of the same things. So you can break it down by the role that they play. You can break it down by how long they've been in the building. You can break it down by the type of position that they hold. And then they're going to give you some suggestions about strategies you can use to help fill the gap you might have in each practice. This is actually something new that they've created and is specific now to our Utah rollout, that they are going down into the individual question level, and they're letting you see how the respondents were providing their answers. So even though 1.2 may have been an area that was weak, this question 10 actually was a strength, because you can see almost 90% of the people think this is pretty highly developed. But the unique piece is this strategies and suggestion that are provided to us by question, specific to each question. So if I wanted to, I could go and search for ways to respond to areas that might be challenges. And this is what that report looks like. So this is specific to 2.3, but I have descriptions of the practice and some examples, strategies and suggestions, and reflection questions for consideration when I'm working with my people in my building. Now, this is kind of cool too, because we're having a rollout now. We really wanted to try to have it done last spring before you did your school improvement plan, but there were just different bureaucratic things that kind of got in the way and made it so it was a delayed rollout. But we have the opportunity to launch this in the next 5 or 6 weeks or so. That's why we do have licenses left. And if you're still interested or would like to consider this, we would love to have you join us, because you could do this in your LEAs and have your feedback, and then do it again in the spring before you actually are writing your school improvement plan. In this case, you can see this school has their first row, which is their initial feedback and report that they've received. And you can see the changes that they were able to have made over time. Now, in this case, this was about a year's time, not maybe 4 or 5 months, but it's nice that you can track over time some of the feedback that you're getting and what the progress would be. Now, if you are interested, you could go to this bit.ly 4D call, and there's an interactive survey, gives you a little sample, not the whole thing, and an interactive report feature. So you can kind of dig around and go and look at that at the 4D call within the bit.ly. And if I've convinced you and you haven't signed up already, then just jump right into the 4D call sign up, and that allows us to know that you're interested, and we'll help make sure that the licenses get to you. One way or another, we're going to make sure that all of our licenses are used up this year. It's a significant investment, but well worth it, because again, we just haven't had the data, and this is going to give you some feedback, not only aligned to the framework, but will be very specific to the qualitative pieces that sometimes we don't get the feedback on, right? On how our distributed leadership is taking place, what the culture might be, how are we taking care of our teachers and our professional learning opportunities. Lots of important ways that we know matter when we're talking about school improvement. So again, 4D call sign up. It is case sensitive, so you want to make sure that you have the lowercase d. And I will give this slideshow to Becky Peters, and we'll make sure she includes this when we send it out. So I'm going to pause and take a break, make sure there aren't any other questions before I go to my next slide. Becky, how do we look?
I do have a question, Tracy. Hi, this is Katina.
Hi, Katina.
Hey, is this opportunity available next school year? Not this school year where we are now, but in a year from now, do you know?
Maybe, yeah, maybe we're working on it. We're trying to
Maybe
find
not,
some
okay.
funding, but nothing is confirmed. So it's in the works. We're trying to put together a case. We're trying to convince people this is an important investment, but it has not been approved at this point. So right now, this feedback that we know of is only available this academic year. Thank you. Good question. Other questions? Jump in. Okay, you can put it in chat and you can come back. Our last thing is we wanted to not only make sure you had a way to contact us, but this survey request is very important for us. And I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to include it into our chat. We need to hear from you. The school improvement team is spending some time trying to analyze how we are doing in identifying and designating, especially our state turnaround. We know at times there's been some confusion about what's the difference between CSI and TSI, and wait a minute now, how many years was that now? Okay, is that a state turnaround? So there's at times been some confusion. And when we hear that from people in the field, we have been sharing that. And in fact, we are working on trying to make some adjustments to the state program, but we want to know, is that time well spent? Are we maybe not really understanding how you're feeling about that, about the school improvement designations? Or is that truly something we should continue to look at? And if so, what changes would help? It's 3 questions. So if you could open up that survey and answer those 3 questions, we have a meeting on Monday, in fact, with some board members and leadership in the district, or excuse me, at the state, and it would make a big difference for us to hear from you. And one other thing I didn't mention in talking about the 4 domains call, if you feel that you might have some schools in your district, but you don't want to mandate, so to speak, that everyone participate, feel free to reach out, because I would be more than happy to come and present to your staff if that would help, and we could make it so that those who choose to participate could. I just pasted my email into the chat. In some cases, that's been a point of concern that LEAs they didn't want to make everybody do it. But if you feel like maybe some of the principals are interested and you want to give them the option, I'd be happy to come and present to your principals at a principal meeting or get on a Zoom with people. Because again, this is such a powerful tool that we have at the ready. We're very excited about it. And kudos to Murray for taking the lead. They are kicking it off this week. They're our first LEA to kind of jump in and launch, and have been leading the charge, so to speak. So checking with chats and make sure.
Tracy, I have a question.
Yes, thanks, Arlene. Go ahead.
What is the process when you have schools that are designated as TSI?
Yeah.
How do people find out about it? Like, does it go through the does the superintendent get the email, then the principals? Or we've had some confusion, and we've had principals that we've had changes in principals, so that's been a little confusing too. But how are they identified, and then who knows that?
Yeah, I'm going to paste a link to the full list for you. Hold on just a second. And
well, I've seen the list, but I'm just wondering who's the first point of contact at the LEA level.
Yeah, Max, do you want to respond to how that was done? That was prior to my jumping in to the state office. I know, or excuse me, maybe Leslie, but I know that there was a sequence of it going to the districts, and the districts were asked to share that information to alert those schools. But maybe Max and Leslie, who were part of that rollout, maybe they know a little more about that.
Sure. Thanks, Tracy. So the requirement under ESEA for identification of TSI schools, the responsibility for the SEA is to notify the LEA. So that was done through, essentially what we did through the superintendent's office at the state was identify or to notify every superintendent and district director that you may have schools that are designated for TSI. And here is the link to look in there and see if you have schools that have been designated for TSI. It is then the LEA's responsibility under the statute to notify the school to tell them that they are TSI. So that's what we did initially. And we did that for, a couple of years while we were identifying TSI schools. We also kind of went on just the tour, talking to Title I directors, assessment directors, special ed directors, charter school directors, but also, Arlene, if you, as you've said, there are principals who felt, who have changed, who aren't in that ongoing communication process. Okay. Go ahead, Tracy.
Yeah, does that help, Arlene? Answer some of your questions? We've had kind of this weird thing called a pandemic that jumped into our space. And so we haven't been having those conversations as directly because we don't have any new identification, right? So just assuming that some of that information still is at the LEA level, that they would share that out. But good question. Other questions? Okay, well, again, I hope that I made you excited. If your district has already jumped in, if your buildings and your schools have already agreed to be part of our program, because I really think that this is such a powerful tool on being able to understand what are some of the strengths and what are some of the challenges that are part of your school improvement process. And if you haven't, we would love to have you jump in. I'm going to include that sign up link in the chat as well. And then to make sure that you would answer those 3 questions about identification. That is for our little baby survey, 3-question survey about school improvement designation specific to state level turnaround. And that's the USBE IMP for improvement. But we'll make sure there are any questions. I'm scrolling through the chat. And let us know if we can come and speak to some of your building level leaders. All right, I think, Becky, that might be it then. And please, if I haven't already said, please do the survey, just 3 questions.
Thank you so much, Tracy, Max, and Leslie. We're really grateful for all the work you do and the presentations you put together to try to get information out across the state to LEAs and to schools. And it's a lot of work, but you're doing an amazing job. So thank you so much. I'd like to thank Val as well for her great presentation. And just a reminder that she will be back on at 1 o'clock. There's a separate Zoom link if you want to talk to Val about the desktop monitoring instruments. She'll be available between 1 and 3. Please do Tracy's survey. They're going to be working with the state board and the legislature to try to make some positive improvements to the state turnaround program. And so your feedback is critical. They need to know what you were thinking as, you know, boots on the ground in your own LEA and what's working, not working. So please take just a couple minutes and fill out that survey. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. We're happy to see you, even if you're just in your little Brady Bunch squares with your names. And we wish we could see you in person, but this is better than not seeing you at all. And so we're grateful for everything that you do and the amazing work that's taking place in our schools and LEAs across the state. You are just really amazing. So without further ado, our team will stay on for a couple minutes in case some of you have individual questions. But other than that, I want to wish you a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. And we're almost to the weekend. And so I hope you enjoy the nice autumn weekend that's coming up. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, Tracy, this is Missy. You're muted, friend.
Boy, I just wanted to know I want to talk and turn on. No, I just want to say thanks to Murray for helping us kick it off.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. I'm excited to see how that goes. Secondary will be doing theirs, yep. And then we'll get our elementaries at their next half-day PD day. So for our Title I schools. Just quick question, were you able to find out why Murray High was not on that list?
You know what? I don't know yet, Missy. And they're listed in the 2018 list for TSI schools, but they're not for the 2019. Okay. And I do know that there were a few schools that they made some like adjustments based on some of the data. And I think either they felt that all the data hadn't been taken into consideration, or there was maybe a way that they used the data in a different order as they were doing the business rules. I have it in my notes to track. There's a few schools that fell in that same venue where they were in 2018, and they should continue, but there were a few schools that fell off the list. And I believe when they kind of did their calculations and realized they had made a few mistakes. That's what I'm assuming. So Missy, don't take my word for it until I know more.
Okay.
But I do remember that conversation that there were a few adjustments.
All right, awesome. I just wondered if you were able to dig that through and sort that out. In the meantime, we will proceed forward and it will be good data anyway, regardless. So excited to see what that looks like. So good to see you guys. Thank you much. Hey, Max, squeak, squeak there and shave, will you?
Thanks, Buddy, the puppy.
Oh, yeah.
Tracy, can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
This is Kendra Embleton over in Duchesne County. So I think I'm in a similar situation there.
Yeah.
The three, you and I talked before, I know. I'm going to fully admit right now, I have not talked with my TSI schools this year because I don't want to tell them they're on if they're not actually on. And I don't want to tell them they're off if they should be on. And so, for example, in elementary school, they were told last year that they're on. And now they're not there. And Neola Elementary was told last year that it was a mistake and they shouldn't be on, but now they're back on. And so I don't want to cause that stress and anger of back and forth. And so it'd be really great to have sort of a final clarification there. And I know with Neola, when they got put on last year, we went through the data there, excuse me, and we couldn't find the data that would have put them on.
Yeah.
And so I'm assuming they shouldn't be on, but I don't know, and I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to.
So maybe don't tell them either way while I'm trying to dig it. You are the other district that I was thinking of when I was referring to Missy. So instead, if you could say, you guys have won the lottery and this WestEd 4 domains call is available to you.
Okay. So then with my Mighton Elementary that we think should be on, but isn't, should I just tell them they also won the lottery and include them? They are a Title I school.
Yes. Yes. And in fact, we went ahead and set aside licenses for every LEA that signed up. That would include the TSI, but then we added all of the Title I so that they would be set aside. So right now, every LEA that's made the commitment is also receiving enough licenses for all their Title I schools.
Okay, wonderful. So then I won't worry about the TSI part of it just yet.
I wouldn't. And I do have your name and I do have it in a master list that we're going back and reviewing. And in fact, Becky and the other school improvement team members know that I brought it up and we've been having conversations about it. But, you know, we need to actually get Aaron and his team with the data to go back and look through that and give us some clarity around why there were some changes with that. And I don't have that answer. But either way, your schools still will be able to take advantage of the licenses.
Okay. I'm new this year, and so I don't want to I don't want to get behind on something that I should be on, but I will set aside TSI for a little bit more and we'll just focus on the WestEd call.
That's so great. Thanks, Kendra, and let us know if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you so much.
You bet.
Okay, since no one's going, I'm going.
Okay.
I'm going with my questions. Okay, so I feel like I'm in a pickle and you guys are like the experts. So I'm coming to you and I don't know why I'm emotional about this, but it has been such a hard time with my little ones. And we feel like we've gone further behind instead of getting ahead in the last 12 months. And I'm sure this is everybody's story. So please don't feel like I want to be special in any way. But I'm like, okay, what do I do now? I just assessed all my kinder first, second, and third. Second and third are struggling, but you know what? It's hard. It's really hard. And we're kind of familiar with that struggle, but my kinder and first graders are, oh my gosh, they feel like I meet with them and I am just like, what are we going to do here? So I'm hoping that there are other people in this situation, not because I want other people to struggle, but because I don't want to feel like, you know, I'm the only person out there with this issue. I think just everybody's worn out, to be honest with you. My staff, we worked all last year, all that crazy. And then we had this huge summer. We had like 200 children here in the summer, great increase. And then we start the fall and it's like summer never happened. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Okay, let's start over. I'm kind of like, now what do I do? Is that happening in anywhere else, or is it just us?
Katina, I have heard from a number of schools that have said it's been a struggle with some of, especially with their youngest students, that the structure just hasn't been there to develop those habits that we have otherwise, and that they're having to kind of step back and go through and try to be as explicit as possible. But there's also that social emotional piece. Yeah, jump in, Christelle.
Yeah, Katina, I just had a chance to run with the data with Aaron to see the annual growth in students from 2020 to 2021 to see what the gap year was. And we actually found out something really strange, which was, it seems like the elementary schools ended up really falling behind in that COVID year, even more than middle and high schools. And we don't really know why at all. But, you know, you and I can talk, and you just let me know if you want me to come and visit your lower elementary kids, and I'd be happy to give you some feedback. But
that'd be awesome.
Pattern, it's a huge pattern which surprised all of us. I sent out the data to the USBE teams, and the fact that elementary school, they just are not recovering as fast as the secondary, which is pretty surprising, because the high school students, which is very rare, usually the gaps in the high school was not as much as in the elementary.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you here at the school, it's incredibly different. Kudos to the staff, because they've been so nurturing and just welcoming and really trying hard. I'll give you a very 30-second case in point. I met with a mom. I've been meeting with so many parents at the beginning of the school with kindergartners about they can't punch each other. It's not okay to do this. We're going to work on this. And I talked with this mom, and I was just saying, you know, we're going to work. We need to work on a behavior plan. I'd like to know how you discipline them at home. We'd love to support you. We'd like you to support us. And her statement to me was, I either time them on or I beat them. And I was like, okay, well, we're not going to do those. So let's focus on what we can do. And she's like, well, he's never been socialized. This is the first time he's been around children his own age. And that threw me. And I just kind of sat there. I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, he's been home with his older brothers and sisters. He's never been around other children. So yeah, they're kind of rough with him. So I see why he's rough with other children. And I'm like, okay, well, this can't happen in school. He can't keep punching children. And she's like, that's okay. I'll pull him, and maybe he can come back next year in first grade. I'm like, that's not the answer. But that was her final decision, regardless of how much I tried to convince her differently. And that's just one quick example. I have several children in kindergarten and first that are, I mean, honestly, we average a year, maybe 3 incidents of behavior, like physical aggression. And now in the first couple of weeks of school, we probably have had 1 to 2 to 3 a day with these little guys. Yeah, it's hard. My kindergarten teacher, she's like, I haven't even started academics. All we've been doing for 3 weeks is procedure and class rules and routines and routines and routines. And yeah, any help you guys can give out would be phenomenal.
So I'll just say, because I've been looking at the data for the elementary schools, we can actually identify a few schools. I actually think Backman is a good example of a school that has those procedures related to grade level work and cross grade level work with the youngsters. And then the other thing is, you know, there's someone who does observe with me from special ed that is really focused on behavior. So, after we get off here, you and I can talk and make a plan. So that's just from my viewpoint in relationship to multilingual learners and certain schools that are closer to you that, actually for some reason have not had the kind of lost experiences or have, created a
Yeah, we get a lot of the children that are not successful in those nearby schools that parents bring here. And I think what we end up with is a lot of the, oh, well, they didn't do well there. And my friend's sister's best friend's daughter comes here, and so we want them to come here. And that's kind of how we end up with a lot of students that are not successful in other schools that come here. And, we want them to all be successful regardless of where they are. But yeah, it's just been a really strange year for me. And I'm just like, okay, what is everybody else seeing? Is it just us in this corner?
Not just you.
Yeah, I see the chat. Thanks for listening.
And I'm going to paste some information. I don't know enough about Katina, the support, but Ashley Lower is behavior specialist, part of the Safe and Healthy Schools team at USBE, and I've included her contact information there. Let me try and get her email in there too. But you could reach out to her to see, what PBIS supports, LRBI. Manual has some ideas, just even through the MTSS, but there's a list for some training as well that you could access filling out the TRP. But Ashley would be a good person at USBE to give you some ideas about what resources might help you in this kind of unique fall.
Anyone else have questions before we end today?
Okay, it's me again. So Missy made a point, sorry, I feel bad. So Missy made a point that she has a lot of new students that were home learners. We've seen that as well. I have 2 new families that kept their children home because they were going to be online students. A kindergartner doesn't do all that well in online, neither does a second grader. And so now she's brought them back, and these children are a good year to 2 years behind. I have a 3rd grader that doesn't know her letters or sounds, but moms, took her to Mexico because she thought that they would be able to catch up in Mexico. They don't speak Spanish. Grandparents don't speak English. So they were in Mexico for a year with no education. Now came back, they were online, no education. And so now I'm like, what do I do with you guys now? We've got to catch you up a big time to try to get you to be ready for 3rd grade, but ready for 2nd grade. Yeah, so I see Missy's point, and she wrote a nice note, but I had to just speak up, sorry.
Well, and they're very lucky, Katina, to have landed at your school where you care and you have such passion around the work. And it will be a big lift for them for a while. So you just take it one step at a time and focus on really where they're at with their instructional levels. It is tough. And I'm sure that those kids are feeling overwhelmed. It's been probably a really tough year and a half for them, especially if they weren't speaking the language where they were. And just the consistency and, the guidance that you're providing them is probably a relief for them.
Thank you, everyone. If there are not additional questions, I think we'll go ahead and close the meeting. Thanks for being here.